At the company's meeting, my wife's father, the CEO, said coldly, "We're letting you go. Performance issues." When I got home, my wife handed me a list of homeless shelter and said, "Now that you're jobless, I don't need you anymore." I left silently. Few days later, she and her father called me 164 times. After realizing who I really was, there's a certain kind of silence in corporate boardrooms that feels like a funeral for your paycheck. That's the sound I walked into that morning, 15 minutes early, because being punctual is apparently the last shred of professionalism I have left. The place looked like it was designed by someone who thought emotionally cold was a color palette. Mahogany table so polished you could perform surgery on it. Chrome chairs that squeak just enough to remind you you're replaceable. An air conditioning set to polar betrayal. I took my usual seat near the middle because I'm a humble man. Humble enough to pretend I wasn't married to the CEO's daughter, and humble enough to keep showing up despite knowing every meeting felt like a trap dressed in a tie. At the head of the table sat Gregory Whitmore, founder, CEO, and self-appointed god of Whitmore Systems. He was the kind of man who made motivational posters obsolete because he sucked the motivation out of everyone in a 10-foot radius. Next to him sat Tracy from HR, whose personality was somewhere between a beige wall and a dial-up tone, and two board members who looked like they'd rather fake their own deaths than attend another one of these. I sat down, nodded politely, and waited for the inevitable. "Evan," Gregory started, his voice smoother than a tax audit. "Thank you for joining us." "Oh, it's my pleasure, Greg. I love being ambushed before breakfast." He shuffled some papers dramatically, probably for effect since men like him think rustling paper equals authority, and gave me a smile so forced it might have needed physical therapy afterward. "We've reviewed your department's performance," he continued, "and unfortunately, the results aren't meeting expectations. Now, for context, my department's results were responsible for saving this company from 3 cyber attacks, optimizing their system efficiency by 41%, and boosting their annual report credibility enough to keep Gregory's yacht dreams alive. But sure, performance issues. I resisted the urge to laugh because HR was there, and Tracy documents joy as a disciplinary concern. Performance issues? I repeated, keeping my voice calm, though internally I was performing stand-up comedy in my head. That's interesting, considering last quarter's numbers beat projections by, what was it? 1.5 miles. Gregory gave me that corporate smirk, the kind rich men practice in the mirror when they know they've already won. "This isn't personal, Evan. It's business." The universal line people use right before they stab you with a smile. He slid an envelope toward me like it contained anthrax. "Your termination letter. Effective immediately." He even had the nerve to use my full name on the top line, Mr. Evan Rivers, like he was addressing a defendant. "Security will escort you out after you clear your desk." Now, here's the thing about being married to your boss's daughter. You know when he's bluffing, because the man's ego can't resist performing. He expected me to argue, to beg, to maybe grovel a little, maybe pull the "I'm your son-in-law" card. Instead, I smiled. Not the polite kind, the slow, unsettling one that makes people check if their wallets are still there. "No need," I said, standing up. "I remember the way out. It's right past the people I made rich." Tracy blinked. One of the board members coughed into his tie to hide a laugh. Gregory froze for a second, like someone had glitched his software. I took the letter, tucked it neatly into my briefcase like it was an invitation to my own liberation, and buttoned my jacket. As I headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the glass, calm, collected, but with that twitch of disbelief you get when you realize the people you helped climb the ladder are now kicking it away. Gregory said something as I reached for the handle, something like, "You'll regret this," but it came out muffled, drowned under the weight of his own arrogance. Walking out, the office looked different, like I'd been watching it under a filter and someone finally turned it off. The interns avoided eye contact. The receptionist gave me that, "I wish I could hug you, but HR has cameras" look. My ID badge felt heavier than usual, symbolic, maybe, or just irony's way of saying hello. I dropped the badge into the security tray and walked through the revolving door like a man exiting a cult. The cold air hit me like freedom wearing cologne. I half expected someone to run after me shouting, "Just kidding." But no, silence. Pure, uncut silence. The kind that says, "You're finally out, man." On the way to the parking lot, I thought about how surreal it all felt. Fired by my father-in-law for performance issues. This is the same man who once told me I was the future of Whitmore Systems. I guess the future got too smart for comfort. Maybe he thought getting rid of me would tighten his control. Newsflash. It just loosened my leash. By the time I got into my car, a black 2018 Tesla that Alyssa always said made me look like I was compensating for something, I was oddly calm. No screaming, no cursing, no dramatic soundtracks swelling in the background. Just a quiet hum of realization. They thought they'd ended me, but they'd just signed a sequel. I drove out of the parking lot, past the building that had been both my paycheck and my prison. And as I waited at the red light, I saw Gregory's reflection in the mirrored lobby window, standing, arms folded, staring after me like a king watching a pawn escape the board. I gave a little wave, the kind that says, "You'll miss me when your servers crash," and pulled away. Traffic was light. The radio played some upbeat song that didn't match my mood, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on someone else's schedule. My phone buzzed twice. Alyssa. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to explain to my wife that Daddy Dearest had just fired me. Knowing her, she'd probably ask if it meant she had to cancel her spa appointment. Halfway home, I stopped for coffee at this hole-in-the-wall diner where the waitress called everyone Han, and the coffee tasted like ambition and regret. I sat by the window, took a sip, and finally laughed. Not a bitter laugh. More like the kind that bubbles up when you realize the joke's on them. They thought they'd thrown me out. They'd actually set me free. Still, I replayed the meeting in my head. Every detail, every micro-expression. Because I knew Gregory's type. Men who confuse control with competence. He'd built an empire on fear, on intimidation, on the idea that everyone was replaceable. Everyone except him. And that, my friend, is the Achilles heel of every self-made tyrant. They think they're invincible right up until the moment they trip over their own ego. I finished my coffee, left a tip big enough to make the waitress smile, and walked out with one clear thought. They had no idea who they'd just fired. They thought they'd taken my job, but they'd forgotten. I built the damn foundation they were standing on. Literally. As I got back into my car, the sun broke through the clouds in that dramatic movie way, like the universe was throwing me a bone. I turned the ignition, grinned, and said to myself, "Congratulations, Evan. You just attended your own freedom party. Dress code, fired." You expect sympathy, maybe a shoulder squeeze, or at least a "we'll get through this" speech. What I got was my wife, Alyssa, sitting at the kitchen island in silk pajamas that probably cost more than my first car, swirling wine like she was auditioning for a commercial called Divorce, the prequel. She barely looked up from her phone. "You're home early," she said, in that tone people use when the pizza arrives before they're ready to tip. "Yeah," I said, setting my briefcase down. The company decided to go in a different direction. Apparently, that direction doesn't include me. Her head snapped up, and I swear, her eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning, and she just unwrapped a new personality disorder. "Wait, you got fired?" she asked, leaning forward, smile creeping across her face like she'd been waiting for this exact headline. If love is patient and kind, whatever this was belonged in a horror movie. She reached into her designer tote, her emotional support purse, and slid a folded piece of paper across the marble countertop. It had that crisp, deliberate fold of something pre-planned. I unfolded it and found a list of homeless shelters. I blinked, looked at her, looked back at the list. Each shelter was neatly highlighted in pink, with one circled and a note scribbled beside it, "Free Wi-Fi." She sipped her wine like a Bond villain. "Now that you're jobless," she said, "I don't need you anymore." There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes he's not part of a marriage, he's part of someone's brand. This was mine. I stared at her, trying to process how a woman who once cried because I forgot to buy oat milk now looked like she was about to write an eviction notice on my forehead. "You had this ready," I said, not really asking. She shrugged. "Greg told me last week that things weren't going well at work. I figured this was coming." Ah yes, Greg, father of the year, destroyer of careers, and apparently the family grapevine. "So," I said, trying not to laugh, "you had time to make a list. That's considerate. You even picked one with free Wi-Fi. Thoughtful." She didn't even blink. "You're not funny, Evan. You've been dragging me down for years. My friends are moving forward in life, getting sponsorships, launching brands, marrying up, and here you are, still playing tech boy. I almost wanted to applaud. The audacity was Olympic level. Tech boy? You mean the guy who's been paying for your yoga retreats, your car, and the half of this house your brand deals haven't touched? Details, she said with a smirk, pouring herself another glass of wine. You should have aimed higher. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Funny thing, Alyssa, you said the same thing on our wedding night. That got a glare sharp enough to slice marble. She stood, the robe falling slightly off her shoulder like she practiced dramatic exits for sport. You're not going to beg? She asked, almost disappointed. No, I said. I don't do sequels. I grabbed my bag, just a duffel with some essentials, and started walking toward the door. She followed, laughing. Where are you even going? You don't have a job. You don't have a place. What? You think you're just going to wander off into the sunset like some movie hero? I looked back at her, smiling. No, Alyssa. I'm going to go find peace. You should try it sometime. Her face twisted. You'll come crawling back. Probably not. But hey, I said, patting the counter where her wine glass sat. Cheers to wishful thinking. I left before she could reply. The door clicked shut behind me, and I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. The night air hit different, sharp, honest, almost friendly. I tossed my bag in the trunk and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like someone halfway between heartbroken and free. Maybe both. I laughed quietly to myself. Fired by my father-in-law. Dumped by my wife. And gifted a list of homeless shelters. You couldn't script irony better if you tried. I started the car and drove aimlessly for a while, the radio humming low. My phone buzzed with notifications. Emails from Whitmore Systems HR, exit procedure, nonsense. The kind of digital paperwork that officially turns you into a ghost in their system. I ignored it. I was done being their punchline. I pulled into a 24-hour diner somewhere off the highway, the kind of place where the lights flicker like they're haunted and the menu hasn't been updated since Y2K. I ordered a black coffee and a slice of pie I didn't really want, because apparently that's what unemployed guys do when their lives implode. They develop a sudden appreciation for diner desserts. As I stirred the coffee, I thought about Alyssa's face when she handed me that brochure. She wasn't angry or hurt. She was pleased. Like firing me was her glow-up moment. The influencer wife finally free from her boring IT husband. The same woman who couldn't reset her Wi-Fi password without texting me in tears. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The waitress came by, refilling my cup. You okay, hon? You look like you just lost your job and your wife in the same day. I chuckled. You psychic or just observant? Observant, she said. Men who order pie at 10 p.m. usually got stories. Yeah, I said, smirking. Mine's called I Married My Boss's Daughter. Spoiler alert, it ends badly. She laughed, shaking her head. Well, at least you're laughing. That's something. It was. Because under the chaos, under the sting, there was something else simmering, relief. A strange, liberating kind of peace that comes when you realize the worst has already happened and you're still breathing. I finished the pie, paid, and headed back to my car. The dashboard clock read 11:32 p.m. I sat there for a second, staring at my phone. One missed call, from Alyssa. Probably wondering if I'd checked into Hope Shelter with Wi-Fi yet. I ignored it. Then another came in, from an unknown number. Mr. Rivers, this is Carl from Whitmore Systems Security. Sir, we didn't realize you still had access to the system servers. Could you? Please confirm. I hung up before he finished. Oh, I still had access all right. And unlike Greg, I knew exactly how much that access was worth. As I leaned back in my seat, the first real smile of the night spread across my face. They thought they'd buried me. They'd just handed me a shovel, and I was about to start digging in the other direction. I started the car again, this time with purpose. The road ahead looked open, dark, full of possibilities, and revenge, maybe. Sweet, calculated revenge. The kind that doesn't need shouting, just strategy. And as I pulled away from the diner, Alyssa's list of shelters sat folded on the passenger seat. I picked it up, glanced at it, and laughed out loud. Then I rolled down the window and let it fly into the night air. Because if she thought I was homeless, she clearly forgot who built the house in the first place. Leaving without a fight sounds noble until you're packing a duffel bag with the same calm energy of someone deleting their entire Spotify playlist after a breakup. I didn't throw a tantrum, didn't smash a single wine glass, mainly because all the expensive ones were technically hers. I just left, silent, composed, and inconveniently dignified. But inside, my brain was hosting a full-blown fireworks show of rage and relief. When I closed the door behind me, I felt the kind of quiet that usually follows an explosion. I checked into a small apartment across town, the kind of place where the walls had seen things and didn't judge you for yours. It wasn't luxury, no marble countertops or scent diffusers shaped like swans, but it was mine. I paid 6 months up front in cash because, contrary to popular belief and my wife's assumptions, I wasn't broke. Not even close. Alyssa thought I was out there looking for a shelter with free Wi-Fi. Bless her clueless little heart. My father-in-law thought I'd be groveling for mercy within the week. Cute. What neither of them knew was that my bank accounts had layers, like onions, or better yet, offshore onions. Cayman onions. See, years ago, I learned that marrying into power means learning to play the long game. While Gregory Whitmore was busy building his empire of overpriced mediocrity, I was quietly building something smarter. My secret project, Nexaware Technologies, started as a hobby, something I worked on during those useless IT support shifts Greg forced on me. I remember him saying once, "Son, some people are visionaries, and some just fix the Wi-Fi." I smiled that day because I already knew which one I was. Nexaware was a cybersecurity platform so advanced even Whitmore Systems couldn't crack it, and they tried. 3 years ago, when they acquired it, Greg strutted around like he'd made the deal of the century. The acquisition documents were clean, the money wired, and the patents secured under a shell company name he didn't think twice about. Rivers Innovations. Guess what the E stands for, Greg? Evan. Rivers. Me. What no one realized was that I never sold the controlling license. I sold them access, temporary, renewable access, tied to a separate holding company registered offshore. They thought they'd bought a product. What they really bought was a subscription with me, as the admin 12% ownership remained mine. Hidden, legal, and quiet. It was like owning the land beneath someone's mansion and waiting for the day they forgot to pay rent. So technically, when Gregory fired me, he also fired his biggest silent investor. Poetic, isn't it? The man spent years reminding me that I was lucky to be family. Turns out, he was the one living off my code. I sat on the worn couch in my new apartment that night, scrolling through the news on my laptop. Whitmore Systems had just posted a glowing press release, strategic leadership realignment to enhance operational efficiency. Translation: they fired the son-in-law and hoped the stock wouldn't notice. I chuckled and poured myself a drink from the minibar. Cheap whiskey, but somehow it tasted like champagne. Then came the texts. Alyssa, predictably first, "You really left?" I stared at the message for a good minute before replying. "Yep. Even packed the air you breathe." Then I muted her thread. Next, a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Rivers, this is Kevin from Accounts. Just a heads up, the Whitmore server renewal date is approaching. Are you handling the license renewal, or should we contact Nexaware directly?" I smiled. "Oh, Kevin. Sweet, oblivious Kevin." I typed back, "Leave it with me," because I already knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, not out of discipline but habit. Years of early meetings had programmed me like a lab rat. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started running diagnostics on the Nexaware backend. Watching those systems hum in real time, knowing every alert, every password, every key file belonged to me, was better than therapy. Whitmore Systems' entire security infrastructure ran on my software. Their contracts, their client databases, their internal communications, all of it. I ran a test lockdown, just for fun. For 20 glorious seconds, Whitmore Systems' firewall went dark. Then I restored it. Like a god playing peekaboo. That's when it hit me. Silence is louder when it's planned. I decided then and there. I wouldn't rant, wouldn't confront, wouldn't seek revenge with fireworks. No, my revenge would sound like a slow, tightening valve. The kind that leaves them gasping before they even realize who's holding the handle. By noon, I'd set up a new LLC under another alias, Rivers Consulting Group. The name sounded boring enough to avoid suspicion, but important enough to get taken seriously. I opened new accounts, restructured my remaining assets, and funneled the Nexaware ownership into a trust. Not the kind of trust you name your kids in. This one had clauses that would make Wall Street lawyers weep. If anything happened to me, the controlling rights reverted to my mother's foundation, not Alyssa, not Gregory, not anyone with the last name Whitmore. At 2 p.m., I got a call from Marcus, my oldest friend and the only person who knew half of my plan. Heard the news, he said. You alive or plotting a Netflix special? Both, I replied, sipping my coffee. Marcus laughed. So what's next? You gonna torch their servers or meditate your way to forgiveness? Neither, I said. I'm going quiet. Quiet, he repeated, skeptical. You don't do quiet. Exactly, I said. That's why it'll work. That night, as I walked down the street toward a corner store to grab dinner, because apparently revenge planning burns calories, I passed a billboard for Whitmore Systems' new ad campaign. Innovation built on integrity. I laughed so hard a stranger looked concerned. If only they knew the foundation of that slogan was currently sitting in my laptop, sipping whiskey and reprogramming destiny. I got back to the apartment, microwaved some instant noodles, and watched the city lights flicker outside the window. Somewhere across town, Alyssa was probably live-streaming her heartbreak for sympathy points. Gregory was probably polishing his whiskey decanter, believing he'd cut out the weak link. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my tiny apartment, grinning like a man who'd just realized he owned the chessboard. There's a power in walking away without slamming doors. People mistake your silence for defeat, but really, it's you taking notes. Every insult, every dismissal, every smug smirk, they all become data points in a blueprint for payback. And trust me, mine was already in version 2.0. Before going to bed, I checked one last thing, the Nexaware renewal contract. Expiration, 7 days. 7 days before Whitmore Systems would realize just how much of their kingdom rested on borrowed ground. I closed my laptop, turned off the light, and lay back on the couch, smiling into the darkness. They thought I'd walked away empty-handed. But here's the truth. When you're the architect of the system, even the wreckage belongs to you. 3 years before that boardroom firing squad, before Alyssa perfected her I married down routine, and before I learned that silence could ruin empires, I was just the tech guy in a corner cubicle of Whitmore Systems. Gregory Whitmore, my beloved father-in-law and part-time Bond villain, had generously offered me a starting position. Translation, know your place, marry the daughter, and maybe, if you kiss enough corporate rings, you'll be allowed to fetch coffee at executive meetings. I still remember the first day. He walked me around the office like I was a rescued stray dog he was proud to domesticate. Everyone, this is Evan, he said, clapping my back with the kind of enthusiasm that hurts your kidneys. He's Alyssa's husband, and our new IT support specialist. The crowd gave polite smiles, the kind people save for toddlers showing off finger paintings. Work your way up, earn your stripes, Gregory said, handing me a laptop that looked like it survived the Cold War. That was his mantra. What he meant was, I own you now, son. But here's the thing. When someone treats me like I'm beneath them, my brain goes into what I call hidden genius mode. It's that mental gear where you pretend to follow orders while secretly rewriting the universe behind their back. So while Greg thought he had me buried in help desk tickets, resetting passwords, removing viruses caused by interns watching sketchy anime, I was quietly building the skeleton of something that would one day make him sweat through his imported suits. Let's talk about those passwords for a second. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company used Gregory 123. No, I'm not kidding. When the man who lectures others about cybersecurity protects his empire with the enthusiasm of a MySpace user, you know you're in for a ride. Every time he forgot his password, he'd summon me to his office like a tech priest. I'd stand there, watching him type the same wrong thing over and over while muttering, I don't know what's wrong. It worked yesterday. Yeah, Greg, and so did your metabolism. Anyway, during one of those emergency IT sessions, I realized how much access I actually had. The man gave me full admin privileges across half the company's systems, thinking I'd only use them to fix printers. Bless his arrogance. I started using my downtime to write lines of code, snippets, algorithms, entire frameworks that would one day become Nexaware's foundation. I'd run simulations after hours, encrypt everything under my alias Rivers, and store the data in a cloud server he didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, Alyssa was too busy curating her online life to notice. Every night she'd sit on the couch with her laptop, rehearsing her influencer voice. Hey guys, it's Alyssa here. Remember to subscribe for my self-care secrets. Meanwhile, I was in the home office writing security architecture that would make the NSA blush. Our marriage was basically two people living in parallel universes. Hers made of filters and hashtags. Mine made of firewalls and revenge potential. At board dinners, Greg loved mocking me in front of everyone. He'd say things like, "You know, Evan here is great with computers. He's basically my in-house tech support." Everyone laughed, including Alyssa, who once added, "Yeah, he even fixes my phone when I drop it in my mimosa." Haha, hilarious. I smiled, nodded, and mentally filed away each humiliation under future payback material. Because that's how hidden genius mode works. You collect insults like receipts. What Greg didn't know was that every time he bragged about his company's next-gen security line, he was really talking about my code. I was the one writing the algorithm that detected intrusion patterns and automated risk isolation. The company thought they were testing a prototype designed by their R&D team. Nope, that was me. Rivers Innovations, quietly patenting every single improvement under my mother's maiden name. By the time the patents were approved, I legally owned the digital backbone of their system. I even got a congratulatory email from the U.S. Patent Office while I was unclogging Tracy from HR's printer jam. Talk about poetic balance. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't out to destroy Greg. Not at first. I just wanted to build something of my own, something that wasn't constantly under his thumb. But every smug smirk, every dismissive, maybe next time, Evan, every time he corrected me in meetings just to hear himself sound smarter, it all added up. By the end of my second year, I realized I didn't just want independence. I wanted leverage. And leverage, my friend, is an art form. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's hidden in contracts, in code, in fine print. So while Greg believed he was investing in a tech acquisition to boost his market share, I was quietly positioning myself as the invisible landlord of his empire. The Nexaware deal came up in a board meeting one summer afternoon. Greg strutted into my cubicle later and said, "We just acquired a small cybersecurity firm for peanuts. Should make us bulletproof." I nodded, pretending to be impressed. "Wow, great move, sir." He laughed. "Yeah, they're founders anonymous. Some genius who doesn't understand valuation. Idiot probably sold us a gold mine for scrap metal." Oh, Greg, if I'd had popcorn, that moment would have been cinematic. By year 3, I had everything set. The code was fully integrated, the licenses automated to expire on a schedule only I could renew, and the patents watertight. I was a ghost in his system, a line of code he'd never see coming. But I still showed up every day like a model employee. Fixed printers, updated firmware, smiled during meetings while he bragged about his software saving the company millions. I even clapped during his presentations. That's how you hide a revolution. You act like a fan. The final straw came one Friday evening. Greg was hosting his annual corporate gala, complete with a live band and enough champagne to drown a horse. I was at the buffet table, enjoying my only payment, free food, when he approached with a martini in hand. "You know, Evan," he said loudly, "if you ever get tired of tech support, maybe we'll find you something in the mailroom." Everyone around him laughed. Alyssa joined in, hand on his arm, eyes gleaming. I smiled and said, "Sure thing, sir. Maybe someday I'll run this place from the basement." He chuckled, "Over my dead body." Funny how life foreshadows itself. That night, I went home, opened my laptop, and looked at the digital fortress I'd built. Every line of code, every algorithm, every hidden control, all waiting. I didn't press the red button, of course. Not yet. But I saved the file under a new name, insurance policy. From then on, every condescending look Greg threw my way felt lighter. Every dismissive remark from Alyssa rolled right off. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. They'd built their world on the foundation of my genius, and one day, they'd learn that foundations have expiration dates. So yeah, Greg built a company. But me? I built the backdoor. When you've spent years being underestimated, revenge doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like an email notification. Quiet, polite, devastating. The day after my silent relocation, I woke up to sunlight bouncing off my laptop and the sweet aroma of justice brewing in my coffee maker. My plan was simple: cut the oxygen supply. Not metaphorically, financially, emotionally. Digitally, I'd been married into the Whitmore dynasty long enough to know where every artery was, and more importantly, which ones they didn't even know existed. Step 1. Joint credit cards. Those lovely little rectangles that funded Alyssa's influencer lifestyle. Frozen. One click, and her Starbucks points were officially on life support. I imagined her face at some designer boutique. Card declined, voice quivering as she said, "That's impossible. I'm married to a Whitmore." "No, sweetie. You were married to a Rivers, and he's done financing your delusion." Step 2. The private family trust account. Gregory always bragged about how bulletproof his family assets were. Bulletproof? Sure, but not Evan-proof. The trust had a small maintenance clause tied to an old Nexaware subroutine, something no one ever noticed because it sounded like tech gibberish. The clause said that if the company's main server failed to validate the software license, the trust account's automated investment feed would pause. So I paused it. Not enough to alert the bank, just enough to make Gregory's precious balance sheets twitch. Step 3. The masterpiece. Whitmore Systems Core Security Framework License. My license. Renewal date. Today. Their IT team probably thought it was a routine auto-renewal. Wrong. I declined it. Just clicked no, that's all. One single click, and the company's firewall started coughing like a 90-year-old smoker. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching the digital chaos unfold through my private dashboard. Within an hour, I could see the internal pings escalating. System error detected. Client access unavailable. Network performance unstable. Music. Gregory's company was glitching harder than a reality show reunion. By day 2, I got a text from Marcus. "Dude, you're on fire. Literally every tech forum is roasting Whitmore Systems." I chuckled and replied, "Oh, must be a sunspot problem." By day 3, Gregory's secretary accidentally called me. By mistake. Right. Her tone had that mix of panic and politeness usually reserved for people talking to kidnappers. "Mr. Rivers. Hi. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Some of our systems are experiencing downtime, and Mr. Whitmore was wondering if you could, take a look." "Oh, sure," I said cheerfully. "Just have him submit a support ticket through the employee portal." She hesitated. That portal seems to be down too." I smiled into the phone. "Well, that's inconvenient." By day 5, I woke up to 164 missed calls. Most from numbers I recognized. A few from Gregory's lawyer. One from Alyssa, which I ignored because peace and stupidity don't mix. The news headlines were starting to catch wind of the unexplained disruptions at Whitmore Systems. Stock dropped 7%. I made pancakes. Later that day, I went grocery shopping. I was halfway down the cereal aisle when a familiar voice called out, "Evan." It was Brent, one of the junior developers from Whitmore. The kid looked frazzled, like someone who hadn't slept since dial-up. "Man, it's chaos in there," he said, grabbing his head. "Everything's failing. The backup servers are looping, and Greg's in full meltdown mode. Rumor is they're calling in an external consultant." "Oh," I said casually, tossing a box of Frosted Flakes into my basket. "Hope they find someone qualified." He laughed nervously. "You always said they didn't pay attention to infrastructure risks." "Guess you were right." "Guess so," I said, smiling. "Take care, Brent. And hydrate." When I got home, I checked my phone again. Another message from Alyssa. "Dad wants to talk. Just pick up already. Please." I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a polite email to Gregory's assistant. "Dear Ms. Sanders, I appreciate your outreach regarding the recent system instability. Unfortunately, I'm unavailable for consulting at this time. However, I can refer you to a capable IT firm once I finish my pancake." Then I signed it with, "Warm regards, Evan Rivers, founder, Nexaware Technologies." By day 7, the full meltdown hit. Gregory himself called me. I almost didn't pick up, but the temptation was too good. "Evan," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." "I thought you fired me, Greg," I said calmly. "Corporate restructure, remember?" "That was a mistake," he admitted. "Look, the system failures. These aren't normal. We're bleeding contracts. I know you had access. Maybe there's something you can do to help." There it was. The crack in the king's crown. "Sure, I could help," I said, keeping my tone even. "But that would mean revisiting my role, and my compensation, and my respect, which, last I checked, was terminated without notice." He exhaled. That deep sigh of a man who finally realizes his empire's built on sand. Evan, name your price. I pretended to think. I'll get back to you. Then I hung up and laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. It wasn't about the money. Not anymore. It was about making him feel the helplessness he'd dished out so casually all those years. That night, Marcus came over with beers. So, you're officially a cyber ghost haunting your ex-boss's servers, he said. How's that feel? Peaceful, I replied, clinking bottles. Like a digital spa day. We sat on the balcony, overlooking the city. He whistled. You ever gonna tell him the full truth? That you own the system? Eventually, I said. Right now, I'm enjoying the foreplay. He laughed. You're insane. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm interesting. By midnight, Whitmore Systems' official website had crashed. Their social media page posted an apology so vague it could have been written by a magic 8-ball. I watched it all unfold, not with glee exactly, more like satisfaction. Years of swallowing insults, of smiling through disrespect, of fixing problems I didn't cause. It all led to this symphony of digital karma. Somewhere in their glass tower, Gregory was probably pacing, yelling at everyone but himself, wondering how his incompetent son-in-law could have possibly left such a hole. And Alyssa? She was likely posting a cryptic quote on Instagram like, sometimes endings are new beginnings, crescent moon sparkles, hashtag healing, hashtag self-love. Cute. What they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. Every smile I gave, every yes, sir, I uttered, every late night of uncredited work, it all built the stage for this. Revenge isn't rage. It's patience in a suit. So yeah, the company was spiraling, the Whitmores were sweating, and me? I was in my little apartment, making pancakes and planning my next move. Because phase 1 was over. Phase 2, the return, was about to begin. And trust me, when I walk back into that boardroom, it won't be as an employee. It'll be as the man they never saw coming. There are moments in life that feel cinematic even without the background music, and walking back into Whitmore Systems was one of them. 3 weeks after Greg's performance issues stunt, I stood outside the same glass doors I'd been escorted through like an unwanted Amazon return. Only this time, I wasn't coming as the IT guy or the obedient son-in-law. I was walking in as the man holding 70% of their digital oxygen supply. The building looked the same, sleek, sterile, humming with self-importance. But it smelled different. Panic has a scent, and this place reeked of it. The receptionist, bless her, froze when she saw me. Mr. Rivers? She said, as if saying my name might trigger an alarm. Do you, have an appointment? I smiled. No, but your CEO does. She blinked twice, probably calculating whether letting me in counted as career suicide. I'll, notify Mr. Whitmore. Do that, I said, and tell him it's urgent. From his biggest investor. That line worked faster than caffeine. Within minutes, Greg's assistant appeared, visibly sweating. Mr. Rivers, right this way. She tried to sound composed, but her voice had that quiver you hear right before someone's annual review. The elevator ride up was quiet, except for the faint ping of emails flooding her phone. When the doors opened, I was greeted by chaos wrapped in business casual. The boardroom was packed, Gregory pacing like a caged lion, board members whispering, HR pretending to take notes like anyone cared. Tracy from HR shot me a look that said, "Oh God, he's back," which only made me smile wider. Gregory turned when he heard the door close. His face went pale, the kind of pale reserved for ghosts and freshly fired CEOs. Evan, he said, voice tight. You came. I was invited, I said, dropping my briefcase onto the table with a satisfying thud. And honestly, Greg, I missed the ambience. Nothing like corporate despair in the morning. The room went silent, except for the air conditioner trying its best to cool the tension. I took the seat at the end of the table, the seat Gregory had always occupied. He frowned. That's my seat. I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. Not today. For a few seconds, no one moved. The board members shifted uncomfortably, unsure who technically outranked who at this point. I opened my folder, neatly printed financials, legal notices, and one thick envelope labeled license agreement. Nexaware Technologies. Let's make this simple, I said. 70% of your company's infrastructure runs on software owned by Nexaware Technologies. As of last week, that license expired. which means, legally, every major client contract tied to that software is in breach. Tracy blinked, her pen hovering uselessly over her notepad. One of the board members, a tall guy named Richard, who always smelled like expensive regret, cleared his throat. You mean to say the company doesn't own its primary framework? I smiled. Oh, they thought they did. They paid for access, not ownership. There's a difference. You'd be amazed how many executives don't read the fine print. Greg's jaw tightened. You deceived us. No, I said. I did my job. You just assumed that meant you owe me too. He slammed a hand on the table, his voice rising. You sabotaged my company. Correction, I said calmly. Our company. You just didn't realize I was on the ownership side. The room murmured. Someone whispered, Is this legal? Another replied, It's brilliant. I continued, sliding a few printed pages across the table. Here's the fun part. While your team's been trying to fix your technical issues, I've been running an audit. Turns out your daughter's little consulting firm has been receiving quarterly transfers from Whitmore Systems, amounting to roughly $1.2 million. No invoices, no contracts, no deliverables. Greg blinked. That's impossible. Oh, I agree, I said. That's why I printed the receipts. Literally, I flipped open a binder and turned it toward him. Neat columns of wire transfers, all linked to Alyssa's company, A. Whitmore Creative Partnerships, LLC. Tracy's jaw dropped. That violates corporate ethics policy section. Save it, Tracy, I interrupted. We all know HR's ethics policy is mostly for decoration. Greg looked like someone had unplugged him. You had access to all this. Greg, I built all this. You gave me full back-end admin access when you made me your IT guy, remember? Said you trusted family. That was your first mistake. A long silence followed. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. One board member finally spoke. So what do you want, Mr. Rivers? I looked around the room, taking my time, letting them stew in the discomfort. I want this company to run honestly, which, as of now, means Gregory Whitmore is suspended pending investigation into financial misconduct. Effective immediately, the board exchanged nervous glances. Richard cleared his throat again. You can't just. I can, I said, pulling out another document. Per the bylaws of Whitmore Systems, any shareholder holding more than 10% of the company's intellectual property rights can call for an emergency board vote in the event of compromised leadership. Richard looked at the document, then at Greg, then at me. He's right. Greg's face turned crimson. You can't be serious. You're taking the word of him. Yes, Richard said. Because he's the only one keeping us from bankruptcy right now. Gregory's lips parted like he wanted to argue, but all that came out was a choked laugh. You planned this. Of course I did, I said, closing the folder. You raised me in this Shark Tank and forgot I had teeth too. Tracy, bless her nervous little heart, tried to regain order. Well, let's proceed with the formal vote. The vote took all of 10 minutes. 5 in favor of suspension, 1 abstaining, and Greg voting against himself. That part was awkward but deeply satisfying. When it was done, Greg slumped back in his chair, staring at the table like it had personally betrayed him. You think you've won, Evan, he said quietly. You think this makes you powerful? I stood, gathering my documents. No, Greg. It makes me free. As I reached the door, he called after me. If you walk out that door, you'll regret it. I turned, met his glare, and smiled. I already did. That's why I'm not staying. I pushed open the boardroom door, and for a split second, I swear the universe slowed down just to let the poetic weight of it sink in. I'd entered that room years ago as the son-in-law, the lucky hire, the background tech guy. I was leaving as the man who'd quietly outplayed an entire corporation using nothing but patience and code. But before I could leave entirely, Alyssa appeared in the hallway. Of course she did, because irony loves timing. She looked perfect, as usual, hairstyled, phone in hand, the face of someone who just lost the Wi-Fi password to her own life. What did you do? She demanded. Fixed a bug, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. You ruined my father. I tilted my head. No, Alyssa, your father ruined himself. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it. She stepped closer, eyes gleaming with that mix of rage and entitlement I'd once mistaken for passion. You're not getting away with this. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Funny thing, you said the same thing on our wedding day. She flinched, just barely. You're a monster. No, I said, adjusting my jacket. I'm efficient. Then I walked away. Down the hallway, past the framed photos of Whitmore excellence, past the trembling interns, past every reminder of the empire that once looked untouchable. I took the elevator alone, watching my reflection in the mirrored walls. Calm, composed, slightly smug. By the time I reached the lobby, word had spread. The staff's whispers followed me like a ripple. He took down Greg, the son-in-law. Did you hear he owns the software? I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Outside, the air was warm and alive. My phone buzzed, an email notification from the board. Offer of CEO position, Whitmore Systems. I stared at it for a second, then laughed. The kind of deep, honest laugh that comes from somewhere below the ribs. I typed my reply right there on the sidewalk. Appreciate the offer, but I'm allergic to hypocrisy. Try Ben from accounting. He's had management envy since 2019. Send. I slipped my phone into my pocket, loosened my tie, and kept walking. The city hummed around me, the sun breaking through clouds like some cosmic spotlight saying, "Well done, kid." Revenge, I realized, doesn't need applause. It doesn't need fire or screaming. Sometimes it's just a quiet walk out of a building you once called hell, with your dignity intact, your enemies exposed, and the satisfaction of knowing you didn't just win. You rewrote the whole damn game. News travels fast when rich people fail. It's like oxygen for gossip blogs and blood for business news anchors. The morning after my little boardroom intervention, Whitmore Systems made the front page of every financial paper. Whitmore Systems under investigation for fraud and misconduct. The subheading was my favorite. Insiders claim whistleblower acted within rights as silent shareholder. Whistleblower. That's cute. They made it sound noble. It wasn't noble. It was personal. I sat in my apartment, still in pajama pants, watching the chaos unfold on live TV while eating cereal straight from the box. On screen, Gregory was doing that billionaire damage control thing, standing outside his mansion in a tailored suit, pretending to be calm while lawyers hovered like vultures. This is a temporary misunderstanding, he told reporters. The truth will come out. Yeah, Greg, it would. Unfortunately for you, I wrote it. By 10 a.m., Whitmore Systems stock had dropped 12%. By noon, it was trending on X, formerly Twitter, but still the same dumpster fire. The hashtags were merciless. Hashtag Witless Systems, hashtag GregGate, and my personal favorite, hashtag Father-in-Flaw. Someone even made a meme of Greg's face photoshopped onto the Titanic, captioned unsinkable. Huh. I nearly choked on my cereal. Meanwhile, Alyssa's name started popping up too. Her consulting firm became the internet's new obsession. Screenshots of the financial transfers leaked. Her influencer sponsors quietly pulled their deals, and one brand even posted a statement. We at Radiance Cosmetics do not condone unethical business practices. Translation: we loved you until you became bad PR. Alyssa's followers turned on her with lightning speed. The same people who used to comment Queen Energy nail polish on her posts were now writing, "Guess karma doesn't come with a filter." She went from posting outfit of the day videos to posting nothing at all. Radio silence. Which, for her, was basically an obituary. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from Marcus. "Dude, you seeing this? They're imploding." I turned down the TV volume. "I see it. They just announced Greg stepping down temporarily. And bro, Alyssa deleted her Instagram." "Now that's serious," I said. "The world might actually spin off its axis." He laughed. "You're a menace, man." "Correction," I said, leaning back on the couch. "I'm retired." But retired didn't mean disconnected. I still had access to their internal systems, which I checked out of habit. Their servers were holding, for now, but their internal communication threads were pure chaos. Executives panicking, investors threatening to pull funding. One email even read, "Does anyone know who owns the Nexaware IP?" Spoiler, nope. The next day, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Evan, please tell them I didn't know." "Alyssa." I stared at it for a good minute, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then I typed, "You didn't know much, apparently," and hovered again. My better self deleted it. Silence was heavier. Silence made people feel their mistakes in surround sound. Later that afternoon, I took a walk downtown. It was funny how the world kept moving while someone else's empire crumbled. People ordering coffee, walking dogs, honking at traffic lights, completely unaware that somewhere, a man who once called me a charity hire was watching his empire burn. There's poetry in that kind of oblivion. As I passed a newsstand, a headline caught my eye. Tech Titan's son-in-law exposes corruption. Inside the Whitmore scandal. There was a blurry photo of me leaving the boardroom, mid-smirk. I laughed. Great, I muttered. Now I'm the hero no one asked for. That night, I poured myself a drink. Good whiskey this time, not the discount stuff, and toasted the quiet. The kind of peace you earn after walking through fire barefoot and somehow coming out with both shoes. I checked my email one more time before bed and saw something unexpected, a message from Clara Jensen. Clara was an old colleague from my early days at Whitmore, one of the few people who treated me like a human instead of Greg's charity project. The subject line read, "Couldn't resist." The email said, "Just wanted to say I saw what you did. You turned corporate betrayal into a TED Talk. Drinks soon? You deserve something better than instant noodles and revenge." I smiled. Clara always had a way with words. The following week, the investigation went public. Turns out, the Securities and Exchange Commission doesn't appreciate creative accounting. The Whitmore's private auditors found discrepancies. Translation, they got caught cooking the books. Greg's offshore assets were frozen faster than last year's turkey, and he was forced to step back indefinitely. Alyssa's mother, Madeline, the walking Botox sculpture, fled to Arizona for spiritual detox, which is rich, considering that woman's soul has probably been on airplane mode since 1987. As for Alyssa, she tried rebranding. She posted one last video, teary-eyed, voice trembling, playing the victim like it was Broadway. "I didn't know what my father was doing," she said, "and I never wanted to hurt anyone." The comments section was brutal. "Girl, you knew. You were cashing the checks. We prefer our influencers with ethics, not offshore accounts." Her video went viral for all the wrong reasons. Within days, her management dropped her, and her name became a punchline on late-night shows. Jimmy Fallon even said, "If you think your family dinners are awkward, imagine being a Whitmore." Meanwhile, I started quietly rebuilding my life. Clara and I grabbed that drink she'd promised, a rooftop bar overlooking the city. She raised her glass. "To poetic justice," she said. "To poetic coding," I replied. She grinned. "You know, you could easily take over Whitmore Systems now." I shook my head. "Nah, I'm done babysitting billionaires. I'd rather build something new." And I did. Within a month, I poured a portion of my settlement money into something I called the Thomas Rivers Initiative, named after my late mother. It was a scholarship program for young programmers from low-income backgrounds. Kids who reminded me of myself before I learned to smile through boardroom humiliation. We launched with a small press release, nothing flashy, but the applications flooded in. Turns out, when you stop trying to impress the world that burned you, it starts looking at you differently. One afternoon, while reviewing applications, I got another call from an unknown number again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Evan." It was Alyssa. Her voice was raw, unfiltered. "Ah," I said. The internet's favorite cautionary tale. She ignored the jab. "I just wanted to say, I never thought you'd actually do it." "Do what? Stand up for myself?" "I didn't mean it like that," she said quietly. Dad's destroyed. Mom's gone. And me? I can't even walk into a coffee shop without someone whispering. Sounds like karma's got good aim." Silence. Then she said, "Are you happy?" I hesitated. "Yeah. Happier than I've been in a long time." "You're enjoying this," she accused, voice cracking. "Not really," I said. "Enjoyment implies it was fun. This was necessary." She sniffed, like she wanted to say something else, but instead she whispered, "Goodbye, Evan." "Goodbye, Alyssa." I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring out the window. The city lights blinked back like a Morse code message I didn't need to decode. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't vindictive. I was just done. The world eventually moved on. The Whitmore scandal became old news, replaced by newer disasters and fresher memes. Greg's name still popped up occasionally, in lawsuits, in think pieces about corporate accountability, and once in a charity gala brochure that hilariously listed him as former visionary. Alyssa resurfaced months later in a small town running a yoga studio called Renewal. I almost respected it. Almost. As for me, I kept building. Nexaware thrived, rebranded under my own name this time. No secrecy, no aliases. I even started mentoring young engineers, teaching them not just how to code, but how to read contracts, protect their ideas, and never let anyone treat them like disposable labor. One evening, Clara stopped by my office with takeout. "You ever think about forgiving them?" she asked between bites of noodles. I thought for a long second. "Forgiveness is overrated," I said. "Peace is better." She smiled. "You really turned your pain into profit." I laughed. "I call it emotional capitalism." Weeks later, I found myself back near the Whitmore building. The company had changed its name. Whitmore Systems was now Nexus Global, because apparently slapping new on old sins makes investors feel better. I stood across the street, watching employees come and go. Nobody recognized me. Good. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to make sure the past really was behind me. The last time I'd walked out of that place, I was angry. This time, I just felt calm. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing you could destroy someone again, but choosing not to. That's real power, the kind that doesn't scream or demand attention. It just exists. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed, an alert from one of the scholarship recipients. A kid named Malik had just landed an internship at a major cybersecurity firm. His message was simple: "Mr. Rivers, thank you for believing in me. One day, I'll build something that changes everything." I smiled. Maybe he would. Maybe that's what all of this was for. Not revenge, not ego, but legacy. Because sometimes, the fall of one empire is just the beginning of another. And this time, the foundation was clean. They say success is the best revenge, but I prefer to think of it as clarity with a payroll. When you've been through humiliation, betrayal, and a corporate soap opera that could win an Emmy, rebuilding isn't just about bouncing back. It's about redesigning the entire blueprint. After the Whitmore fallout, I could have retired. I had more money than I'd ever need, a library of incriminating emails, and front-row seats to watch my enemies' Google reputations rot. But I wasn't interested in NextAware relaunches under original founder, Evan Rivers, to provide next-gen cybersecurity with integrity. The word integrity wasn't just PR, it was a punchline aimed directly at Greg's ghost. 2 days later, my inbox exploded. Former Whitmore employees, good ones, the real brains, started reaching out. "Hey, Evan, heard what happened. Any openings?" It was poetic justice watching Greg's old talent crawl out from under his crumbling kingdom, looking for leadership that didn't come with a side of condescension. I hired 6 of them immediately. We weren't just a company, we were the Survivors Club. Then there was Clara. She officially joined as COO, though we both knew titles didn't matter between us. She'd been the one person who saw through my polite, "I'm fine" routine during my Whitmore years. "You're not fine," she used to say. "You're just patient." Now, she'd help me turn patience into profit. Our first week was chaos disguised as progress. Coffee spills, code crashes, and an overenthusiastic intern who mistook my vintage keyboard for that old thing taking up space. But it felt alive, real, messy, human. Every ping of a new client inquiry felt like proof the universe wasn't punishing me. It was redirecting me. One morning, Clara walked into my office holding 2 coffees and that mischievous grin she always wore when she had news. "Guess who just called?" she said. "Please tell me it's not Greg," I replied. "I'm out of popcorn." She laughed. "Nope. Better. A Fortune 500 company wants to pilot our new security software. Said they saw your interview on CNBC. I blinked. Interview. She pulled up her phone. There I was on screen, sitting in some studio, looking calmer than a monk on sedatives. The segment was titled, "The Man Who Outsmarted His Father-in-Law." I hadn't realized my quiet revenge had turned into a redemption arc. The anchor asked me what motivated my success, and my recorded self said, "Underestimation. It's the most renewable energy source on the planet." I almost spit my coffee. Did I really say that? Clara smirked. "You did, and it trended." The pilot deal went through. Suddenly, NextAware wasn't just back, it was booming. We became the cybersecurity firm that companies actually trusted. Ironically, the Whitmore name still popped up, mostly in sentences like, "Please make sure we don't end up like them." That alone was worth another toast. Meanwhile, Gregory's life was unraveling faster than a cheap necktie. The federal audit had unearthed everything from shady vendor payments to falsified expense reports. Turns out, borrowing against future revenue isn't just creative accounting, it's also illegal. His assets were frozen, His board voted him out permanently, and rumor had it he was now living in a smaller residence. Translation: the guest house of his former mansion. Alyssa, on the other hand, had gone quiet. Her yoga studio in Arizona was struggling, and every now and then, she'd post vague motivational quotes like, "Growth hurts, but so does staying the same seedling." I scrolled past every time. Growth might hurt, but humility must have gone extinct in her zip code. Then came something unexpected, an invitation. Not from Alyssa, thank God, but from the Chamber of Commerce. They wanted me to speak at a tech conference about ethical innovation. I nearly laughed out loud. A year ago, I was the guy fixing Wi-Fi for people who called me buddy. Now, I was a keynote speaker. Life really is a stand-up comedian. The conference was held in a swanky downtown hotel with chandeliers so bright they could cook breakfast. I walked onto that stage to polite applause, wearing the same calm smile that once unnerved Greg. My speech wasn't scripted. I just spoke from memory, about the quiet power of being underestimated, about ethics not being a liability, and about how failure is just character development for the sequel. When it was over, I got a standing ovation. Some guy from a major tech magazine came up afterward and said, "That was brilliant. You're like the anti-Whitmore systems." I grinned. Best compliment I've had all week. That night, I got back to the office to find Clara waiting. She was sitting at my desk, feet propped up, reading an email on my screen. "You got another offer," she said. "Government contract. Cyber Defense Initiative. Big money." "Let me guess," I said, walking over. "They want us to fix something that shouldn't have been broken." She nodded. "Pretty much." I looked out the window, the city lights winking like they knew something I didn't. "You think we're ready for that kind of responsibility?" She smiled. "You were born ready. You just had to get rid of your in-laws first." We both laughed. It felt good, light, easy. Not the forced laughter of company dinners or the brittle laughter I used to fake in front of Alyssa's friends. This was the sound of real beginnings. Months passed, and Nexaware became more than a company. It became a culture. No politics, no nepotism, no hidden traps in contracts. I made sure of that. Every Friday, we held open forums where anyone could pitch ideas, even interns. And we had a rule: no one eats alone. Because I'd spent too many lunches alone in the Whitmore cafeteria, listening to people whisper. Our success drew attention. Investors called, journalists emailed, and LinkedIn recruiters suddenly remembered I existed. But I wasn't chasing hype anymore. I'd learned that empires don't fall because of failure. They fall because of arrogance. And I'd had enough of that for several lifetimes. One evening, as I was locking up, Clara stopped me. You could have just walked away and lived quietly," she said. "Why build again?" I thought about it. Because rebuilding reminds me I didn't just survive them. I outgrew them. She nodded, then added softly, "I'm proud of you, Evan." And just like that, something shifted. The tension, the unspoken history, the quiet connection between us. It was all there, humming in the air. I didn't say anything, neither did she. Some things don't need words. Weeks later, Nexaware hosted its first scholarship dinner for the Thomas Rivers Initiative. Seeing those young programmers, their eyes bright, their dreams unbroken, was like watching a different version of myself. I gave a short speech, mostly improvised. When I started in tech, I thought power meant being in control. Now I know it means giving it away. The room went silent, then erupted into applause. Afterward, one student approached me, a shy kid named Malik. "Mr. Rivers," he said, "I read about what you did with Whitmore Systems. It's inspiring." I chuckled. "Kid, that's just a fancy way of saying I refuse to stay quiet." He smiled. "Well, I'm glad you didn't." Driving home that night, I realized something. Revenge might have started this story, but redemption was writing the ending. The anger was gone, replaced with a strange, calm gratitude. Every insult, every humiliation, every betrayal, it all led me here. I pulled into my apartment garage and sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the engine die down. My phone buzzed, a notification from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I checked it. You were right. Silence does hurt more. No name, but I didn't need one. I stared at the message for a long time, then turned off my phone and smiled. Because finally, I understood. The real rebuild wasn't the company, or the money, or the reputation. It was me. I wasn't the fired employee, the humiliated husband, or the lucky son-in-law anymore. I was Evan Rivers, founder, builder, survivor, and finally, free man. And this time, I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was designing a legacy. 2 weeks after the scholarship dinner, life had finally settled into something resembling peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need noise to prove it exists. The world had moved on from the Whitmore's implosion, and I had too, mostly. Sure, every now and then a headline would flash across my phone about the disgraced tech patriarch or former influencer Alyssa Whitmore attempting comeback. But I didn't click anymore. That chapter was closed, laminated, and filed under not my problem. Or so I thought. Until one Tuesday afternoon, the past decided to call. Literally. I was in my office, halfway through a code review and a bad sandwich, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something about the timing, 3:14 p.m., the universe's favorite hour for irony, made me swipe. I didn't answer, though. I let it go to voicemail. Old habits die stylishly. A few minutes later, I saw the notification, one new voicemail. I hit play, not expecting much. Probably a spam call about my car's extended warranty. What I heard instead froze me mid-bite. Evan, it's me. Alyssa. For a moment, I just stared at the phone like it had betrayed me. Her voice was softer, slower, missing that trademark smugness that used to fill every room she walked into. I know you don't want to hear from me, she continued, her tone brittle around the edges. You probably shouldn't. I just needed to say something. You never shouted, Evan. You never fought back. You just left. That silence, it's worse than anger. You were the real one, and I see that now. She paused then, audibly exhaling. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I get it now. You didn't leave to hurt me. You left because you finally respected yourself more than I did. Click. End of message. For a solid 30 seconds, I sat there, motionless. My sandwich had fallen apart on the desk, my coffee had gone cold, and the only thing moving was the replay button, because, of course, I hit it again. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to hear if she meant it. Maybe I wanted to catch the faintest trace of regret hiding behind her words. Or maybe I just wanted to confirm that karma really had a voice. You never shouted. You never fought back. That line hit harder than it should have. Because she was right. I hadn't. When everything collapsed, when her father fired me, when she handed me that brochure for homeless shelters, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just walked away. And silence, it turns out, echoes longer than screaming ever could. After the second replay, I laughed. Not bitterly. Just the kind of laugh that slips out when life circles back with perfect irony. The woman who once accused me of being too calm was now haunted by that calmness. Poetic doesn't even cover it. Clara poked her head into the office. You good? She asked, eyeing the untouched sandwich and the expression on my face. Define good, I said, leaning back in my chair. She frowned. You look like someone who just read an obituary for an ex. Close, I said. I just listened to one. She arched a brow. Alyssa? Yeah. She called you. Voicemail. No tears, no theatrics. Just a neatly packaged apology with guilt sprinkles on top. Clara stepped in, crossing her arms. And how do you feel about that? I shrugged. Somewhere between indifferent and oddly amused. Like watching a car you used to own finally get towed. She smirked. That's disturbingly specific. Yeah, well, closure's a weird thing. You wait for it for years, then it arrives uninvited during lunch hour. Clara studied me for a moment. You're not going to respond, are you? No, I said. I think silence deserves to finish what it started. She nodded slowly, approving. Good. Because if you do, I'm confiscating your phone. Understood, ma'am. She laughed, gave my shoulder a quick pat, and left me to my thoughts. I hit play one last time, not for her words, but for the closure buried between them. You were the real one, Evan. That line lingered long after the message ended. I couldn't tell if she said it for me or for herself. Maybe both. That night, I didn't delete the voicemail. I just archived it, like a relic. A digital tombstone for a version of me that used to need her validation. Then, because irony is my love language, I poured myself a drink, queued up a playlist titled Peace After Petty, and sat on my balcony watching the city flicker below. The next morning, I got to the office early. Something about that voicemail had me wired in a strange, productive way. I dove into work, tweaking a new Nexaware feature that used AI to predict cyber threats before they even hit. We called it the firewall that thinks ahead. Kind of like me, really. Around noon, Clara popped her head in again. You're in early. Did you finally find your purpose? Or did insomnia win again? Both, I said. Apparently heartbreak makes good caffeine. She laughed. So what's next for the great Evan Rivers? You've conquered your demons, rebuilt your empire, made half the tech world jealous, and got a voicemail apology. What's left? I thought for a moment. Peace. Maybe some quiet success. No drama, no revenge arcs. Just building something that lasts. Boring, she teased. Yeah, I said, smiling. Beautifully boring. That afternoon, a journalist called asking for a follow-up interview. I said no. The last thing I needed was to become a soundbite again. They wanted to frame my story as from fired son-in-law to tech titan. I wasn't interested in the mythology. The truth was simpler. I got tired of letting other people narrate my story, so I wrote my own. Later that week, while reviewing scholarship applications, I noticed one essay that stood out. It started with, "Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all." I read it twice, smiling to myself. The student talked about learning restraint, about choosing silence over reaction, and about how quiet strength often gets mistaken for weakness. I could have sworn fate was trolling me. I approved that application instantly. Life went on. The Whitmore name faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals. Greg was reportedly negotiating plea deals. Alyssa's yoga studio closed after 6 months. Her final Instagram post said, "Starting over again, this time for me." I didn't like it, but I didn't sneer either. Maybe she finally got it. Maybe not. Either way, I had work to do. One Friday evening, Clara and I closed up the office early and went for dinner. We ended up at a small Italian place where the lights were dim, the bread was free, and the wine didn't taste like disappointment. "You seem lighter," she said, swirling her glass. "Yeah," I admitted. "It's weird. I thought I'd feel nothing after hearing that voicemail, but it feels peaceful, like finishing a book you hated but still reading the last chapter." She smiled. Closure doesn't always come gift-wrapped. Sometimes it just shows up uninvited with bad timing. "Exactly," I said, "but I think I'm finally over it." "Good," she said, "because you deserve someone who texts, not someone who leaves voicemails." I laughed. "You volunteering for the position?" She smirked. "Maybe, but only if there's health insurance." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I didn't see Alyssa's face in every memory or hear Greg's voice in every doubt. It was just the present, messy, imperfect, and real. When I got home that night, I scrolled through my phone and hovered over the archived voicemail one last time. Then I pressed delete. Not out of anger, not to make a statement, just because I didn't need it anymore. It had served its purpose. The silence had spoken louder than her apology ever could. I stood by the window, watching the city stretch beneath me. Somewhere out there, people were still chasing the validation I'd finally stopped needing. That's the thing about betrayal. It breaks you. But if you're lucky, it rebuilds you better. I whispered to myself, "You were the real one, Evan." And for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to say it. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed coffee, and headed to the office. The sun was rising, casting gold over the skyline, and for once, it didn't feel like another day to fight. It felt like another day to live. The voicemail was gone, the ghosts were quiet, and my future had never been louder. Because sometimes, the best apologies aren't heard, they're outgrown. There's a kind of revenge people expect, the cinematic kind. You know, fire, shouting, lawsuits, headlines, maybe a dramatic, "I told you so," with thunder clapping behind you for effect. That's not the kind I went for. Mine was quieter, cleaner, the kind that doesn't need an audience, because the victory plays out naturally, one consequence at a time, like dominoes politely collapsing in your favor. I used to think closure meant confrontation, but now I know. It's peace with a side of profit. By the time fall rolled around, life had found a rhythm. Nexaware was expanding faster than I expected. We'd outgrown our first office and moved into a sleek downtown building with frosted glass doors and a panoramic view that screamed executive redemption arc. The same city skyline that once looked like a battlefield now looked like a playground. Every morning, I'd walk in, greet the team, grab coffee, and sit down in an office that still smelled like new paint and second chances. Clara, my partner in chaos and reason, was now officially COO. The staff adored her because she had that rare mix of competence and empathy that made people want to follow her into a storm. Together, we turned Nexaware into something Greg's empire could never be: ethical, transparent, and actually functional. The irony? Half our clients were companies fleeing the fallout of Whitmore Systems' collapse. It's almost poetic when your enemies fund your comeback. Speaking of Greg, word around the industry was that he'd settled his charges. He wasn't in prison, but he wasn't free either. His temporary leave from Whitmore Systems had quietly become permanent exile. The board voted him out, and the company rebranded under new leadership. They even changed their name from Whitmore Systems to WI Syntech. I nearly choked when I saw the new slogan: integrity in every line of code. Oh, the irony. The company built on theft and arrogance now selling integrity like it came in a 12-pack. But the funniest part? They still used our software, my software, under license. Every renewal payment that hit our account felt like a quiet bow from the people who once thought I was disposable. As for Alyssa, she became a ghost. Word was she'd left Arizona after her yoga studio failed and was living somewhere up north, teaching online classes about self-awareness through adversity. I didn't follow her updates, but occasionally someone would send me screenshots. Her captions were unintentionally comedic. Growth is painful, but so is staying small. Girl, you married a Whitmore. Small was never your issue. I didn't respond or comment. The old me might have wanted the last word, but silence had become my sharpest weapon. One crisp Friday morning, I arrived at the office early, habit, not ambition. The city below was waking up. Car horns, early commuters, the faint hiss of espresso machines. I poured myself coffee, leaned on the balcony railing, and watched it all unfold. That's when Marcus called. "Morning, CEO," he said in that smug tone he reserved for people he knew had made it out alive. "Morning, unemployed friend," I shot back. He laughed. "Hey, I'm freelancing. Big difference. Anyway, just wanted to say, I saw the Whitmore stock update. Down another 12%. Guess people aren't buying Integrity 2.0. I smiled. "You calling to brag on my behalf?" "Pretty much," he said. "It's wild, man. Remember when you were sitting on my couch, jobless, eating leftover pizza, saying you'd figure something out?" "Yeah," I said, chuckling. "Turns out, revenge pairs nicely with entrepreneurship." He paused, then asked, "You ever think about reaching out to Alyssa? Like, just to say whatever?" "No," I said immediately. She had her say. I had my silence. "We're even." "Damn," he said. "You're colder than my landlord." "Not cold," I said. "Just healed." He exhaled. "Man, that's deep. You're like the Buddha of payback. Put that on my business card." I joked, ending the call. Later that morning, Clara walked in with her usual 2 coffees. "You look smug," she said, handing me one. "What's the occasion?" "I was just thinking about how far we've come," I said. "You know, from unemployment and betrayal to running a multi-million-dollar company. It's weird how fast tables turn when you stop begging for a seat." She grinned. "You didn't just turn the table. You built your own and sold the blueprints." We clinked our coffee cups like it was champagne. At noon, I had a meeting with the government cybersecurity division. They wanted to license Nexaware's AI-driven threat detection system. Big contract. Big validation. During the pitch, the lead officer said, "Mr. Rivers, your reputation for integrity precedes you." I almost laughed out loud. Integrity. The very word Greg used to weaponize against me. The irony was rich enough to retire on. That deal closed by the end of the week, bringing in more revenue than my last 3 years at Whitmore combined. The universe, it seemed, paid on delay but with interest. That weekend, Clara and I attended a networking gala. Our first as equals, not underlings. The ballroom was packed with tech elites, venture capitalists, and wannabe disruptors wearing $800 sneakers. At one point, a familiar face approached, Richard, one of the Whitmore board members who had voted to suspend Greg. He looked like a man who now regretted voting late. "Evan," he said, shaking my hand. "Good to see you thriving. You really did rebuild from the ashes." "Yeah," I said with a polite smile. "Turns out, ash makes good fertilizer." He chuckled awkwardly. "You know, I never realized how much of Whitmore's success depended on your work." Greg always said. "Yeah," I interrupted. Greg said a lot of things. None of them aged well. Richard coughed into his drink and wisely changed the topic. Later that night, as the gala wound down, I stepped outside for air. The city skyline shimmered under the soft glow of streetlights. I could still hear faint music from the ballroom, a jazz band playing something slow, thoughtful. Clara joined me, arms crossed against the cool air. "Nice speech," she said. "Thanks," I replied, though I'm pretty sure half that crowd only applauded because I mentioned AI. She smiled. "Still, you were good. Calm, confident, humble." I raised an eyebrow. "Humble? Let's not stretch it." She laughed, bumping her shoulder against mine. "Fine. Calm, confident, semi-humble." I looked at her then, really looked. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was. The pain, the bitterness, even the sarcasm, they'd become fuel, not chains. "You know," I said, "I used to think revenge had to be loud, that the only way to win was to make sure everyone saw it. But this," I gestured to the skyline, to the life we'd built, "this feels better." Clara nodded. "Because this isn't revenge. It's evolution." That line stuck with me long after the night ended. Evolution. Maybe that's what all of this had been, shedding versions of myself that no longer fit. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected email from a familiar address, gregory.whitmore@wisentech.com. The subject line read, "You won." I hesitated before opening it. Inside, there was only one line: "I underestimated you. You deserved better." No signature, no excuses. Just that. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the smirk he wore the day he slid that termination letter across the table and said, "Performance issues." I hit archive. Not delete, archive. Let him live forever in my inbox, just far enough from relevance. Months passed, and life kept getting better. Nexaware expanded internationally. The Thomas Rivers Initiative tripled in size, sponsoring coding camps for kids who didn't even own laptops. And every time a news story popped up about Whitmore Systems' ongoing restructuring, I just smiled and turned the page. One quiet evening, I sat on my balcony again. Same city view, same soft hum of traffic. Clara had left after a long day of meetings, and I was alone with my thoughts. I poured a drink, leaned back, and let the silence wrap around me like an old friend. That's when my phone buzzed, a notification from Nexaware's accounting app. Another payment from Wisentech. License renewal complete. I laughed out loud. Every few months, they still paid for access to the very system Greg once called overcomplicated nonsense. I raised my glass toward the skyline. "Cheers, Greg. Thanks for keeping the lights on." The night air was cool, the city alive, and for the first time, I felt something better than victory. I felt balance. Revenge had done its job. It got me through the storm, but peace built the house afterward. Because here's the truth they don't tell you about revenge. The loud kind burns out fast. It's fireworks, brilliant but brief. But the quiet kind, the kind that builds, grows, and pays dividends, that's forever. So when people ask how I got over it, how I went from fired son-in-law to founder, from humiliated husband to headline success, I tell them the same thing every time. I didn't shout. I built. And silence, my friend, pays dividends. Then I finish my drink, close my laptop, and smile at the thought of Gregory somewhere out there seeing my name on his company's monthly expense report. That's not just revenge. That's poetic accounting. My wife said to her mother, "I don't think this marriage will last another month. He's ugly to look at. I'd rather kiss my dog than to sleep with me." They both laughed in agreement. I smiled. Why wait a month? Let's end it now. Then I left. That night, her sister sent a message that made my hands freeze. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Wednesday is the worst day of the week, because that would be giving Wednesday way too much credit for originality. Wednesday is just Tuesday's uglier cousin who showed up uninvited to the week and decided to overstay its welcome. But this particular Wednesday, this godforsaken hump day that tasted like burnt coffee and broken promises, this Wednesday at exactly 6:47 p.m., was about to become the most significant Wednesday of my entire 32 years on this increasingly disappointing planet. I'd just finished a double shift at Morrison's warehouse, which is a fancy way of saying I'd spent 16 hours lifting boxes that weighed more than my self-esteem and smelled like a mixture of industrial cleaner in someone's grandmother's attic. My back was screaming in languages I didn't know existed, My hands were rough enough to sand down furniture, and I'm pretty sure I'd sweated out about 70% of my body weight. The warehouse was one of those places where the air conditioning was more of a suggestion than an actual feature, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to make you question whether you were working or auditioning for a low-budget horror movie. But hey, the paycheck cleared every 2 weeks, and in this economy, that's practically winning the lottery. I pulled into the driveway of our modest 2-bedroom rental house in a neighborhood that real estate agents generously called up and coming, which is code for the Starbucks hasn't arrived yet, but give it 5 years and maybe you'll break even. The house was painted this weird shade of beige that I'm convinced was specifically designed to make you feel nothing, absolutely nothing, every time you looked at it. We'd been living there for 3 years, Marissa and I, trying to save up for something better, something that didn't have a kitchen faucet that leaked every time Mercury was in retrograde, or whatever astrological excuse we were using that month. I grabbed my lunchbox from the passenger seat, the one with my name written in Sharpie on the side like I was still in 3rd grade, and hauled my exhausted carcass out of my 10-year-old Honda Civic that made concerning noises every time I went over 15 miles per hour. The car and I had an understanding, though. I didn't ask it to be reliable, and it didn't ask me to trade it in for something that didn't sound like a dying robot every time I hit the gas pedal. Fair trade. As I approached the front door, fishing around in my pocket for keys that always seemed to migrate to the most inconvenient location possible, I could already hear voices coming from inside. My wife Marissa and her mother Judith were having one of their marathon gabfests, which typically involved wine, gossip, and a level of judgment that could peel paint off walls. Now, I want to be clear about something right from the start. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I wasn't being one of those creepy husbands who lurks around corners trying to catch his wife in some scandalous revelation. I literally just have good hearing and the unfortunate habit of existing in my own house at inopportune moments. I slid the key into the lock as quietly as possible, not because I was sneaking, but because Judith had this thing about men stomping around like elephants, and I'd learned over the years that sometimes the path of least resistance involved pretending you were a ninja entering your own home. The door creaked open, because of course it did. The landlord had been meaning to fix that for approximately 18 months, and I stepped into the small entryway, setting my lunchbox down on the table we'd picked up from IKEA during a sale that Marissa had insisted would change our lives. Spoiler alert, it didn't, but it did hold our mail and my lunchbox, so I guess it was fulfilling some kind of purpose. That's when I heard it. Crystal clear. No ambiguity whatsoever. Marissa's voice, the same voice that had said, "I do" for years ago in a ceremony at the community center that cost more than our first car, was floating through the living room with all the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. "Mom, I don't think this marriage is going to last another month, honestly. I mean, he's just... God, he's so ugly to look at sometimes. Like, I literally can't even. I'd rather kiss my dog than sleep with him at this point." And then came the sound that really sealed the deal, the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday, Judith's laugh. Not a polite chuckle, not an uncomfortable clearing of the throat, but a full-throated, genuine laugh. The kind of laugh you hear at comedy clubs when the headliner lands a particularly good punchline. My mother-in-law was laughing at the idea of her daughter preferring to make out with a Labrador retriever named Biscuit rather than engage in any form of physical intimacy with her husband. With me, the guy who'd just worked a double shift, so we could afford the organic dog food that Biscuit apparently required for his sensitive stomach. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds, which is about how long it takes for your entire perception of reality to shift from, "I'm tired, but I have a home and a marriage," to, "I'm tired and apparently losing a popularity contest to a golden retriever." My brain went through several stages very quickly: shock, denial, anger, and then landed on something I wasn't expecting: clarity. Pure, undiluted, almost refreshing clarity. I didn't storm in. I didn't throw things. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply walked into the living room where both of them were sitting on our secondhand couch, wine glasses in hand, looking for all the world like they were having the time of their lives, roasting me like I was a celebrity at a Comedy Central special. Marissa's eyes went wide when she saw me, and I watched in real time as her face went from relaxed and happy to the kind of pale you usually associate with people who've just seen a ghost or realized they left the oven on. Judith, to her credit, at least had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable, though I suspect that had more to do with being caught than any actual remorse. I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter smile, but genuinely smiled, because suddenly everything made sense in a way it hadn't for months. All those nights of excuses, all those times she'd flinched when I tried to touch her hand, all those conversations that died the moment I entered the room. It all clicked into place like the world's most depressing puzzle. "Well," I said, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me. "Why wait a month? Let's just end it now. Saves time, saves energy, and honestly, saves money on dog treats since Biscuit apparently has a competitor for your affection." The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I'm pretty sure I could hear the neighbor's cat judging us from 2 houses away. Marissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land and was having serious regrets about its life choices. Judith blinked repeatedly, her eyes going wide and then wider, like an owl that had just been confronted with a philosophical question it wasn't prepared to answer. I grabbed my keys from where I'd just set them down, did a little mock salute that I'd definitely seen in some movie and couldn't quite place, and delivered my exit line with the kind of timing that would have made a sitcom writer proud. "Enjoy your mother-daughter roast session, ladies. Don't wait up." And then I walked out of that beige house, got into my dying Honda Civic, and drove away, feeling oddly proud of my one-liner delivery and surprisingly calm about the fact that my marriage had just imploded over a comparison to a dog named Biscuit. Wednesday, man. What a day. So here's the thing about making dramatic exits from your own marriage. Nobody really prepares you for the logistics of where you're supposed to go afterward. It's not like they have a handbook titled, "So Your Wife Compared You to a Dog, a Practical Guide to Emergency Housing." I drove around for about 20 minutes, which in retrospect was probably 15 minutes longer than necessary, but I was running on pure adrenaline and the fumes of righteous indignation, and those don't exactly come with a GPS feature. I ended up at the Sunset Vista Motel, which was aggressively misnamed considering there was no vista. The sunset was blocked by a billboard advertising personal injury lawyers, and calling it a motel was being generous to establishments everywhere. The neon sign out front flickered between vacant Y and complete darkness, which I chose to interpret as a metaphor for my current life situation rather than a commentary on the electrical system. The place cost $49 a night, and I'm pretty convinced that price point included an unspoken agreement that I wouldn't ask questions about the stains or the previous occupants. The guy at the front desk looked like he'd seen every variation of human despair and had long since stopped being impressed by any of it. He had a magnificent mustache that seemed to have its own personality and a name tag that said Earl, though he never confirmed whether that was actually his name or just something the previous Earl had left behind. I handed over my credit card, the one that was just mine. Thank God, not the joint account that I was suddenly viewing with deep suspicion, and he slid me a physical key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped keychain with the room number printed on it. "Checkout's at 11, Earl said, his voice suggesting he'd said this exact sentence approximately 40,000 times and had stopped carrying around occurrence number 12. "Ice machine's broken. Vending machine takes dollar bills but doesn't give change, and if you hear screaming, it's probably the cat that lives in the walls." "There's a cat in the walls?" I asked, because apparently that was the detail my brain decided to focus on. Earl shrugged with the kind of profound indifference that comes from years of motel management. "Allegedly. Room 237. And yes, I'm aware that's the room number from The Shining. And yes, that felt oddly appropriate. Was located on the 2nd floor, accessed by an exterior staircase that creaked ominously with every step. The room itself was a masterpiece of depressing efficiency. One double bed with a comforter that had probably seen things that would make a therapist weep. A TV from sometime during the Bush administration, the first one. A bathroom the size of an airplane lavatory, and a window that overlooked the parking lot, and, beyond that, a gas station that advertised hot dogs, in letters so faded they looked like a threat rather than a promise. The entire space smelled like a combination of industrial-strength disinfectant, sadness, and what I could only describe as the tears of previous occupants who'd also made questionable life choices. There was a strange brown stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like Abraham Lincoln's profile, which felt weirdly patriotic, and the carpet had a pattern that I think was designed specifically to hide other stains, which was honestly pretty smart from a business perspective. I dropped my duffel bag, The one I'd hastily packed with whatever clothes I could grab during my dramatic exit, which turned out to be 3 t-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, 5 pairs of socks, because apparently my subconscious prioritizes foot comfort during emotional crises, and exactly 0 pairs of underwear, on the bed, and just stood there for a moment, taking in my new temporary reality. This was it. This was rock bottom, or at least rock bottom's budget accommodation. I was a 32-year-old man standing in a $49 motel room because my wife had decided I ranked below a Labrador Retriever in the attractiveness department. I should have been crying or punching walls or doing whatever it is that men are supposed to do when their marriages explode, but instead I just felt tired. Not the physical exhaustion from the double shift. That was still there, lurking in my shoulders and lower back like a persistent relative, but a deeper kind of tired that settles into your bones when you realize you've been fighting for something that the other person checked out of months ago. I lay down on the bed, which was exactly as uncomfortable as it looked, and stared at Abraham Lincoln's profile on the ceiling. "Honest, Abe," I said out loud to the empty room. "You ever get compared to a dog?" Lincoln, being a stain and also deceased, didn't respond, but I felt like he would have been on my side. That's when my phone started buzzing, and buzzing, and buzzing some more, like someone had attached it to a beehive and then kicked the beehive while yelling insults at the bees. I pulled it out of my pocket and watched as the notifications rolled in, one after another, each one from Marissa, each one apparently more desperate than the last. "Ryan, we need to talk." That wasn't what it sounded like. "You're being dramatic." Mom was just venting, and I was agreeing to be supportive. "You can't just leave like that. This is so typical of you, running away from problems." And then, my personal favorite, "I'm your wife. You owe me a conversation." The messages kept coming, each one cycling through a greatest hits collection of manipulation tactics, guilt, anger, gaslighting, victim playing, and what I can only describe as emotional poetry that would have made Shakespeare cringe so hard his ruff would have fallen off. She went from apologizing to insulting me to apologizing for insulting me to explaining why the insults were actually my fault, all within the span of about 15 messages. It was like watching someone speedrun through every relationship red flag that exists. I sat there, phone in hand, watching the messages pile up like some kind of twisted social media feed dedicated entirely to my failed marriage. Each notification made a little ding sound that was starting to feel like water torture, and I realized with absolute clarity that I had 2 choices. I could engage with this circus, or I could put the phone down and let her scream into the void. I chose the void. The void seemed nice. The void didn't compare me to household pets. I silenced my phone and tossed it onto the nightstand, which was really just a wobbly table with delusions of grandeur. I closed my eyes and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 3 hours. This morning, I'd woken up as a married man with a routine and a life that, while not perfect, was at least familiar. Now I was lying in a motel room that possibly contained a wall cat, staring at ceiling Lincoln, while my wife had a meltdown via text message. The universe, I decided, had a truly twisted sense of humor. Just when I thought maybe I could actually fall asleep despite the suspiciously lumpy mattress and the sound of someone's TV blaring through the wall, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Marissa's name on the screen. It was her sister, Heather. Now, Heather and I had always had a weird relationship. She was 3 years younger than Marissa, worked in social media marketing, and had the kind of personality that could only be described as chaos with good intentions. She made memes for a living, had opinions about everything, and was the family member who always said the quiet part loud at Thanksgiving dinner. Marissa found her exhausting. I found her refreshing, mainly because she was one of the few people in that family who didn't treat me like I was auditioning for the role of acceptable husband and constantly failing. Her message was short, which immediately made it more alarming than Marissa's novel-length guilt trip. "Hey, you probably don't want to hear from me right now, and I totally get that. But you should really check your wife's hidden photo folder. I'm sorry. You deserve to know." I stared at that message for a long time, long enough that the screen went dark and I had to tap it back to life. Because here's the thing about messages like that, they're grenades. You know they're grenades. You can see the pin is pulled, but you also know that once you acknowledge them, once you actually look at whatever horror show is waiting in that hidden photo folder, there's no going back. Ignorance might not be bliss, but it's at least comfortable. and I was currently lying on what felt like a mattress stuffed with regret and broken springs. That line, that single sentence from Heather, made my hands freeze midair like I was in some kind of dramatic pause in a movie where the protagonist has to decide whether to open the mystery box. Except this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and the mystery box was apparently my wife's phone, and nothing good ever came from sentences that started with "you deserve to know." I set the phone down again, face up this time, Heather's message glowing in the darkness of room 237. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd deal with whatever fresh hell was waiting in that hidden photo folder. Tonight, I just wanted to sleep in this sad motel room and pretend that the worst thing that had happened today was being compared to a dog. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I didn't sleep. Let's just establish that right up front, because I'm not going to pretend I had some peaceful night of rest while processing my emotions like a well-adjusted adult in a self-help book. No, I lay there on that mattress from hell, staring at Abraham Lincoln's ceiling profile, listening to the wall cat, allegedly, and the couple next door who were either moving furniture or training for some kind of Olympic sport that involved a lot of rhythmic thumping. The motel's idea of blackout curtains was apparently fabric that exists, so the parking lot lights streamed in through the window, casting everything in this sickly orange glow that made the whole room look like it was being filmed through an Instagram filter called despair. Around 3 in the morning, after I'd mentally cataloged every stain on the ceiling and composed several imaginary speeches I'd never actually deliver, I gave up on sleep entirely. I grabbed my phone, squinted at the brightness that immediately felt like an assault on my retinas, and opened Heather's message again. It was still there, still taunting me with its existence, still promising information that I simultaneously wanted and absolutely did not want. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. This was it. The moment of truth. The point of no return. Every cliché you can think of about crossing thresholds and opening Pandora's boxes, except this box was digital and contained my wife's betrayal in high definition. I typed back, "What am I looking at here?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, which meant Heather had also been awake at 3 in the morning, which made sense because she was basically a vampire who ran on iced coffee and internet drama. Her response came through in seconds. "Give me a minute. Sending files." And then my phone started buzzing with incoming images, one after another, like someone was feeding photos into a scanner and just letting it run. The first one loaded, and I had to blink several times to make sure I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. It was a selfie of Marissa and Biscuit, our Labrador retriever, the same dog she'd compared me to just hours earlier. Except in this photo, she wasn't just posing with him. She was kissing him, full-on kissing him, and not like a cute, "I love my dog" peck on the forehead. No, this was tongue out, full commitment, the kind of kiss that you usually see between people who are about to be asked to get a room. Biscuit looked confused, which was honestly the most relatable thing about this entire situation. I stared at the photo for a solid minute, my brain trying to process what my eyes were showing me. For a second, I wasn't even mad. I was genuinely concerned for the dog's mental health and whether he needed therapy or at least a stronger understanding of boundaries. Who does this? Who takes a selfie making out with their dog and then saves it? What was the thought process there? Better document this moment for posterity? Was this going in the family photo album? Before I could fully unpack the psychological implications of my wife's relationship with our pet, another image loaded. Then another. Then another. It was like watching a slideshow from hell, except hell had better production values. The second photo wasn't of Biscuit, which was almost a relief until I realized what I was actually looking at. It was Marissa and a guy I recognized immediately, Trent Morrison, her ex-boyfriend from college. The same Trent she'd assured me was ancient history and totally not a threat, and just a friend she occasionally texted to be polite. They were at a restaurant, a nice one, the kind with cloth napkins and entrees that cost more than my hourly wage. Marissa was wearing the blue dress I'd complimented her on last week, the one she'd said she wore to a girls' night out with her coworkers. Trent had his arm around her. She was leaning into him. They looked happy. They looked like a couple. They looked like people who definitely weren't just being polite. I checked the metadata on the photo because apparently, at 3 in the morning, I'd become a digital forensics expert. The date stamp said last Tuesday. Last Tuesday, as in 6 days ago. As in the same Tuesday, I'd worked overtime to cover the cost of the water heater that broke, while she was apparently out living her best life with Trent at what looked like Giovanni's, the Italian place downtown that required reservations and had a menu without prices, which is restaurant code for bring your wealthy uncle. The third photo was them kissing. Not the dog this time, Trent. A real, actual kiss between two people who definitely knew each other better than people who were just being polite should know each other. I laughed. Out loud. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest when your brain short-circuits and can't figure out what other emotion to process. So it just defaults to humor, because humor is safer than acknowledging that you're looking at photographic evidence of your wife cheating on you while you were at work earning money that apparently funded her date nights. I laughed like a man who'd just realized he'd been cast as the comic relief in his own life story, like I'd been paying for my own humiliation in high definition, 1080p quality, with excellent lighting and composition. The couple next door stopped their furniture Olympics for a moment, probably wondering who was cackling like a supervillain at 3 in the morning in room 237. It was me. I was the villain origin story happening in real time. My phone immediately started ringing. Heather. I answered on the second ring because at this point, why not? The night was already a disaster. Might as well lean into it. Ryan? Oh God, you saw them. Her voice was frantic, guilty, like she'd just told a kid that Santa wasn't real and also his dog ran away. I saw them. I confirmed, my voice surprisingly steady. All of them. The dog, the ex-boyfriend, the restaurant that I'm guessing I paid for through our joint account since she hasn't had a job in 8 months. I'm so sorry, Heather said, and she actually sounded like she meant it, which was more than I could say for anyone else in her family. I found out 2 days ago. I was over at Mom's house, and Marissa left her phone on the counter. I wasn't snooping, I swear, but she got a text from Trent, and it was right there on the lock screen, and it said something about last night was amazing, and I could not look, you know. How long? I asked, because apparently I was a glutton for punishment. How long has this been going on? From what I could tell from the messages. About 3 months. Maybe longer. The photos with Trent go back to July. Heather paused, and I could hear her taking a breath like she was preparing to drop another bomb. Ryan, she's been seeing him behind your back. Multiple times. Restaurants, his apartment. Even that weekend she said she was going to visit her college friend in Portland. She was with him. Portland. The trip I'd encouraged her to take because I thought she needed time with friends. The trip I'd given her $200 for gas money. The trip I'd spent alone in our house, eating cereal for dinner and catching up on laundry, being a supportive husband while she was apparently in a hotel room with Trent doing things I didn't want to think about. And your mom knows, I said. Not a question. A statement. Mom knows, Heather confirmed, her voice tight with anger. She's known for at least a month. Maybe longer. She thinks it's fine because, and I quote, Marissa deserves to be happy, and if that means exploring her options, then that's what modern marriage is about. Modern marriage. I repeated slowly, like I was tasting the words and finding them rotten. Is that what we're calling cheating now? Exploring options? Mom's logic doesn't make sense on the best days, Heather said. This isn't even close to her best day. She was probably the one encouraging Marissa to see Trent. She never liked you, Ryan. No offense. None taken, I said, which was true. Judith's dislike of me had been so obvious from day one that it would have been more offensive if she'd pretended otherwise. Let me guess, she was probably the one holding the ring light for those selfies, giving direction like a discount photographer. Turn left, darling. Show more teeth. Make sure the betrayal really pops in the frame. Heather actually laughed, which made me feel slightly better about the entire situation. Honestly, probably. She's been Team Trent since college. She never shut up about how he came from a good family and had prospects. You know what that means. Yeah, I said. Money. It means money and the kind of job title that sounds impressive at dinner parties. Exactly. Heather sighed, and I could picture her on the other end of the phone, probably sitting in her apartment with her 3 cats, surrounded by the kind of organized chaos that social media managers seem to thrive in. I know this is a lot to process, and I'm sorry I had to be the one to tell you, but I couldn't just sit on this information. You're a good guy, Ryan. You deserve better than this. Better than being compared to a dog I apparently have to compete with for my wife's affection? I asked. Low bar, but I appreciate the sentiment. We talked for another 20 minutes, Heather filling in details that I simultaneously needed and hated hearing. How Marissa had been deleting messages. How she'd created a hidden folder on her phone specifically for photos with Trent. How the whole family had been walking on eggshells around the situation because nobody wanted to be the one to tell me. When we finally hung up, I sat there in the orange glow of the parking lot lights, my phone full of evidence, my marriage clearly over, and my pride somewhere in the vicinity of the motel's broken ice machine. The wall cat made a noise that sounded sympathetic, which probably meant I'd officially hit rock bottom when you're getting emotional support from alleged feline infrastructure. But here's the weird thing. I felt relieved. Genuinely, honestly relieved. Because now I knew. Now it all made sense. And now I could stop wondering why my wife flinched when I touched her, or why she always had an excuse not to spend time together. It wasn't me. It was never me. It was her, and Trent, and a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a mother-in-law who thought betrayal was just modern marriage. And honestly, they could have each other. Morning came whether I wanted it to or not, which is the problem with mornings. They just show up like that one friend who doesn't understand social cues. The sun rose over the Sunset Vista Motel in all its mediocre glory, streaming through the inadequate curtains and hitting me directly in the face like nature's way of saying, get up and deal with your problems. You can't hide in this $49 room forever. The wall cat had gone silent. The Olympic furniture movers next door had finally exhausted themselves, and I was awake with approximately 2 hours of sleep, a phone full of incriminating evidence, and the kind of righteous anger that only comes from discovering your wife has been living a double life while you've been working doubles to pay for it. I took a shower in the bathroom that was so small I had to step out to change my mind, using the tiny soap bar that was wrapped in paper so thin it was basically a suggestion of soap. The water pressure fluctuated between gentle mist and fire hose trying to kill you, with no middle ground whatsoever. But standing there underwater that couldn't decide what temperature it wanted to be, I had a moment of absolute clarity that felt almost spiritual, if spirituality could happen in a motel bathroom that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the kind of lawyer who'd seen every variation of marital disaster and could navigate through this mess with the kind of professional detachment that I currently couldn't muster because I was still processing the fact that my wife had made out with our dog and documented it like it was a milestone worth celebrating. After getting dressed in yesterday's clothes because, again, I'd forgotten to pack underwear in my dramatic exit, I did what every heartbroken, over-caffeinated man in the 21st century does when facing a legal crisis. I Googled. Specifically, I Googled cheap divorce lawyer who takes vengeance seriously, which in retrospect was probably not the best search query. But at 7 in the morning running on 2 hours of sleep and the existential dread of being cheated on, my SEO skills were not exactly at their peak. The search results were a mix of law firms with names like Jacobson and Associates and Miller Legal Group. All very professional, all very expensive looking, all featuring stock photos of people in suits shaking hands in front of bookshelves filled with impressively thick legal volumes that probably nobody had actually read since 1987. But then, buried on page 2 of the results, because apparently even in my crisis, I was thorough enough to go to page 2 of Google, which is basically the digital equivalent of looking in the couch cushions. I found a listing for Lawson Legal Services, honest representation for honest people. The website looked like it had been designed in 2003 and never updated, which either meant the lawyer was ancient or didn't care about digital marketing, and honestly, both options seemed fine to me. There was a phone number, an address on the less fancy side of downtown, and a tagline that said 30 years of fighting for what's right. The photo showed a man who looked like he'd been personally overseeing divorces since the Civil War, with more wrinkles than a Shar-Pei and eyes that suggested he'd heard every excuse, every lie, and every sob story that humanity could produce. I called the number, half expecting an answering machine or a receptionist who'd tell me the earliest appointment was in 6 weeks. Instead, a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Lawson Legal Services, this is Lawson. Hi. Mr. Lawson. I started, suddenly realizing I hadn't actually prepared what I was going to say. I need a divorce lawyer. Quickly. Like, as quickly as possible because my wife has been cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend and also possibly our dog. And I just found out last night. and I'm currently in a motel room that might have a cat living in the walls, and I really need to talk to someone who can help me not lose everything in this disaster." There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause that makes you think maybe you've said too much and scared off the only lawyer willing to answer his own phone at 7:30 in the morning. Then, "Son, you sound like you've had a hell of a night. Can you be here in an hour?" I could have kissed him. I didn't, because that would have been weird, and also I was trying to cut down on inappropriate kissing after last night's revelations. But the sentiment was there. The office was located in a 3-story brick building that had character, which is what people say about buildings that are old but haven't fallen down yet. The directory in the lobby listed a bail bondsman on the first floor, a tax accountant who apparently only worked during tax season on the second floor, and Lawson Legal Services on the third floor, which I reached via an elevator that moved so slowly I legitimately considered taking the stairs halfway through the ride. The office itself was exactly what the website had promised: functional, honest, and completely unconcerned with impressing anyone. The waiting area had chairs from the 70s, magazines from the 90s, and a receptionist desk that was currently unoccupied, though there was a note that said "back at 9 a.m., Dorothy." There was a coffee maker in the corner that looked like it had survived several wars and was still producing coffee out of spite and determination. "You must be Ryan," said a voice from the doorway to the inner office, and there stood Mr. Lawson himself, looking exactly like his website photo except more three-dimensional. He was probably in his mid-60s, with silver hair that he'd given up trying to tame, a suit that had seen better decades but was clean and pressed, and the kind of face that suggested he'd spent 30 years listening to people's problems and had developed a very specific set of facial expressions for each category of human disaster. "That's me," I said, standing up and shaking his hand, which had the grip of someone who'd been doing manual labor before becoming a lawyer and never forgot where he came from. "Come on in. Coffee, please," I said, following him into an office that was packed with filing cabinets, law books, and the kind of organized chaos that suggested a brilliant mind that had better things to do than worry about feng shui. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that looked like it had been brewing since dawn, handed me one, and settled into his chair behind a desk that was covered in files, legal pads, and a nameplate that said "Thomas Lawson, attorney at law," in letters that were starting to fade. "So," he said, pulling out a legal pad and clicking a pen that looked older than I was, "tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Take your time. I've heard worse, I promise you." So I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the dramatic exit, the motel, the messages from Marissa, the photos from Heather, the 3-month affair with Trent, the Portland trip, the joint account that had funded my own humiliation, and yes, even the thing with the dog, because at this point, what was the point of leaving out details? Mr. Lawson took notes, his pen moving across the legal pad in shorthand that probably only he could read, occasionally nodding or making small noises of acknowledgement. When I finished, he set down his pen, took a sip of his coffee, and looked at me with eyes that had definitely seen worse. "Son," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of legal experience, "you don't need revenge. You need paperwork." I blinked. "Paperwork, paperwork," he confirmed, leaning back in his chair. "Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. Revenge gets you in trouble and costs you money. Paperwork is clean. Paperwork is legal. Paperwork gets you out of this marriage with your dignity and your assets intact, and it makes her pay for what she's done within the boundaries of the law." He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started making a list, explaining as he went. "First, we file for divorce on grounds of adultery. That's easy. You've got photo evidence, which is basically a gift from the gods of family law. Second, we document every transaction from that joint account. You said she hasn't worked in 8 months? 8 months, I confirmed. She said she was finding herself and needed time to explore her passions. Well, she certainly explored something, Mr. Lawson said dryly. Did she explore it using marital funds? The joint account, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the banking app. I can see the transactions. Restaurants, spa days, boutique shopping, even a $300 dog grooming session. Mr. Lawson's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. If that kid was a seasoned divorce attorney who'd just been handed leverage. Oh, this is good. This is very good. If she's been using marital funds to finance her affair, We can make her reimburse you for that. Plus, depending on how your assets are structured, we might be able to argue for a favorable division based on her adultery and misuse of shared resources. So the dog gets visitation, but she gets the bill? I asked, because apparently, even in serious legal consultations, my brain defaulted to sarcasm as a coping mechanism. Mr. Lawson grinned, and it was the kind of grin that suggested he'd been waiting his entire career for a client who appreciated the irony of divorce law. Now you're thinking like a client I can respect. We spent the next hour going through everything: my rights, her potential claims, the division of assets, the timeline for filing, what to expect in court, and how to protect myself financially while the divorce was pending. Mr. Lawson explained everything in plain English. None of that legal jargon that makes you feel like you need a law degree just to understand what you're signing. My retainer is $1,500, he said finally, sliding a contract across the desk. That covers the initial filing and the first month of work. After that, we bill hourly, but I'm honest about my hours. I don't charge you for thinking about your case while I'm getting groceries. You'll get itemized statements, and if you have questions, you call me. That's what you're paying for. I looked at the contract, at this man who'd listened to my story without judgment, who'd offered me coffee and clarity, who'd made me feel like maybe this disaster had a path forward that didn't involve me living in a motel room forever. Where do I sign? I asked. Leaving Mr. Lawson's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in approximately 16 hours. Purpose. Not happiness, not relief, not even satisfaction, but purpose, which is what happens when you channel raw emotional devastation into a productive task that involves spreadsheets and a lawyer who looks like he's personally witnessed the fall of Rome. I had a mission now, a quest, a legitimate reason to dive headfirst into the digital paper trail of my failed marriage and emerge victorious with evidence that would hold up in court and also potentially be useful for a very depressing scrapbook that I would never actually make but enjoyed imagining. The first order of business, according to Mr. Lawson's carefully written instructions on his ancient legal pad, was to gather and organize all evidence of Marissa's extracurricular activities. This meant screenshots, bank statements, credit card bills, text messages, emails, photos, and basically anything that could prove what she'd been doing while I was at the warehouse moving boxes and believing I was in a functional marriage. He'd told me to be thorough, be organized, and for the love of God, don't delete anything accidentally, because digital evidence was only useful if it still existed. I returned to the Sunset Vista Motel, my temporary command center, my fortress of solitude, my $49 a night headquarters for Operation Document Everything, and set up shop. I grabbed the wobbly nightstand, dragged it next to the bed, plugged in my phone charger, and opened my laptop, which I'd thankfully had the presence of mind to grab during my dramatic exit along with my collection of mismatched socks and zero underwear. The laptop was a 5-year-old Dell that made concerning whirring noises whenever I asked it to do more than one thing at a time, but it had a working keyboard and could access the internet, which made it more reliable than my marriage. I started with the joint bank account, logging in with credentials that suddenly felt like archaeological artifacts from a previous era when I'd trusted the person I shared finances with. The account history loaded slowly, my laptop whirring like it was trying to achieve flight. And then there it was. Months of transactions, laid out in neat little rows with dates and amounts and merchant names that told a story more compelling than most Netflix documentaries. Let me tell you something about bank statements. They don't lie. They can't lie. They're just numbers and dates and the cold, hard truth of where money went and why. And looking at our joint account history was like reading a mystery novel where the detective is an idiot who didn't notice all the obvious clues because he was too busy working overtime to afford the clues in the first place. June 15th, Giovanni's Italian restaurant, $147. I was working that night. I specifically remembered because we'd gotten a massive shipment of industrial parts that took until midnight to process. June 22nd, Serenity Day Spa, $230. She'd told me she was going to the library to research freelance opportunities. July 3rd, Nordstrom, $312. The blue dress. The same blue dress she'd worn in the photo with Trent. I'd complimented that dress. She'd smiled and said she'd found it on clearance. $312 is not clearance unless you're shopping in a dimension where money means something completely different. July 18th. Pooch Paradise Premium Grooming, $308. $308 for dog grooming. I'd had the same haircut for 4 years that cost $18 including tip, but Biscuit apparently needed the platinum package with aromatherapy and a massage. The dog got a spa day that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The irony was so thick I could have used it as insulation. I started taking screenshots of everything, organizing them into folders on my laptop with names like restaurant receipts, shopping sprees, dog-related financial crimes, and my personal favorite, evidence that I've been funding my own humiliation. Each screenshot got saved, backed up to the cloud, and then backed up again to an external hard drive because Mr. Lawson had looked me dead in the eye and said, "Technology fails. Back up everything twice. 3 times if you're paranoid. Be paranoid." The credit card statements were even more illuminating, like someone had taken a highlighter to all of my wife's lies and color-coded them by category of betrayal. There were charges at stores I'd never heard of, restaurants and neighborhoods she'd claimed to never visit, and my personal favorite discovery, a hotel charge from the Portland weekend. The Extended Stay America in Portland, Oregon. Except here's the plot twist that made me laugh so hard the wall cat got concerned. The charge was for 2 nights, but she'd told me she was staying with her college friend Sarah for 4 days. I pulled up my old text with Marissa from that weekend, scrolling back through messages that now read like a comedy script written by someone with a cruel sense of humor. Having so much fun with Sarah. We went to Powell's bookstore today. Sarah says hi. Every message was a lie. Every enthusiastic text was her probably typing it while lying next to Trent in a hotel room that I'd helped pay for through our joint account. I screenshot everything. Every text, every receipt, every credit card charge, every bank statement. I became a digital forensics expert, a spreadsheet warrior, a man on a mission fueled by instant coffee and the kind of focused anger that comes from realizing you've been cast as the comic relief in someone else's romance. The instant coffee, by the way, came from the motel's vending machine after I discovered that the in-room coffee maker produced a substance that couldn't legally be called coffee in most states. I'd bought 6 packets of instant espresso for $2 each, which was highway robbery, but at this point, I needed the caffeine more than I needed financial responsibility. I mixed it with hot water from the bathroom tap, which I know sounds disgusting, and you're absolutely right, it was disgusting, but desperate times call for desperate measures and questionable beverage choices. By noon, I had compiled a digital dossier that would have made a private investigator proud. I had spreadsheets. I had timelines. I had a folder labeled Exhibit A, Dog Better Than Me, that contained not only the infamous biscuit kissing photo, but also a breakdown of every penny spent on that dog's luxury lifestyle, while I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to save money. I even cross-referenced Marissa's credit card charges with her text messages to me, creating a side-by-side comparison that showed exactly where she'd actually been versus where she'd claimed to be. It was damning. It was thorough. It was the kind of evidence that Mr. Lawson would probably frame and put on his wall as an example of excellent client preparation. My phone buzzed with more messages from Marissa, each one more frantic than the last. I ignored them all and added screenshots of the messages themselves to my evidence folder, because apparently, she hadn't figured out that continuing to text your estranged husband while he's building a legal case against you is probably not the best strategy. But then again, this was the same woman who documented her affair in photos and saved them to her phone, so strategic thinking clearly wasn't her strong suit. Around 2 in the afternoon, I realized I needed to go back to work. Not just because I needed the money, though I definitely needed the money, especially now that I was paying for motel rooms and lawyer retainers, but because I needed the normalcy. I needed to lift boxes and scan barcodes and exist in a space where people weren't betraying me, and the biggest drama was whether the forklift would start on the first try. I showed up for my shift at Morrison's warehouse at 3 o'clock, still wearing yesterday's clothes because I still hadn't solved the underwear situation, but at least I'd showered and no longer smelled like industrial metal and existential crisis. My supervisor, Rick, was doing inventory near the loading dock, checking off items on a clipboard and looking exactly as thrilled about it as anyone looks when doing inventory on a Thursday afternoon. Rick was one of those middle-aged guys who'd been working at the warehouse since the 90s and had achieved a level of zen-like acceptance about it. He had 3 kids, a wife who worked as a nurse, a mortgage on a house in the suburbs, and the kind of stable, boring life that I'd thought I was building toward before everything imploded. He was good people, the kind of supervisor who remembered your birthday and didn't write you up if you were 5 minutes late because your car was acting up. Ryan, he said when he saw me, checking his watch with exaggerated concern. You're early. Are you feeling okay? Did something happen? Is this a cry for help? I'm going through a divorce, I said, grabbing my time card and clocking in. Turns out my wife's been cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend and also possibly our dog. I'm currently living in a motel room that costs $49 a night and might have structural cats. How's your day going? Rick blinked at me, his pen frozen mid-checklist. What? Yeah, I said, heading toward my station. It's been a week, and it's only Thursday. I spent the next 4 hours loading trucks, organizing shipments, and humming. Actually humming. Like a cartoon character who'd just won the lottery, except instead of winning money, I'd won the freedom to leave a relationship that had been dead for months, and I'd just been too stupid or too hopeful to notice. I hummed while I lifted boxes. I hummed while I drove the forklift. I hummed while I wrapped pallets in plastic sheeting that always somehow managed to stick to itself in the most annoying ways possible. Rick found me around hour 3 of my shift, stacking boxes of industrial supplies with what must have looked like suspicious enthusiasm. Okay, man, I have to ask, he said, leaning against a support beam and watching me work like I was a documentary about human behavior. Are you okay? Like, actually okay? Because you just told me you're getting divorced and living in a motel, but you're humming show tunes while stacking 50-pound boxes. That's either really healthy coping or you've completely snapped. I need to know which one so I can decide whether to be supportive or concerned. I set down the box I was holding and turned to face him, wiping sweat off my forehead with my shirt sleeve. You want the honest answer? Always. I feel better than I have in months, I said. Yeah, my marriage is over. Yeah, I'm sleeping in a room that Abraham Lincoln haunts via ceiling stain. Yeah, my wife preferred making out with our Labrador over spending time with me. But you know what? Now I know. Now it makes sense. And now I can move forward instead of wondering why nothing I do is ever good enough for someone who is never going to be satisfied anyway. Rick nodded slowly, processing this information. So you're okay? I'm better than okay, I said. I'm free. And also extremely well documented. I have spreadsheets, Rick. Color-coded spreadsheets. You're weird, he said, but he was smiling. Divorced weird. I corrected, picking up another box. There's a difference. He shook his head and walked away, muttering something about needing to update the employee wellness protocols. Mr. Lawson called me on Friday morning while I was attempting to make the motel's coffee maker produce something that resembled actual coffee rather than the brown liquid sadness it had been generating. His voice came through my phone speaker with that particular tone lawyers use when they're about to tell you something you don't want to hear, but legally have to do anyway. Ryan, I need you to go back to the house, he said, not even bothering with pleasantries because we'd moved past the stage of our attorney-client relationship where we pretended this situation wasn't absolutely insane. I know you don't want to. I know it's going to be uncomfortable. But legally, you need to establish that you haven't abandoned the property. Abandonment can complicate things in divorce proceedings, especially regarding asset division. So I have to go back to the scene of the crime, I said, watching the coffee maker sputter and wheeze like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. The place where I discovered my wife thinks I'm less attractive than a Labrador retriever. That house, Mr. Lawson confirmed. You don't have to stay there. You don't even have to stay longer than an hour. But you need to go in, establish presence, preferably grab some more of your belongings, and make it clear you're not abandoning your legal claim to the property. Think of it as a strategic visit, not a homecoming. Can I bill this as emotional labor? I asked, because I feel like facing your soon-to-be ex-wife after she spent 3 months cheating on you and comparing you to household pets should count as overtime. Unfortunately, the legal system doesn't compensate for emotional distress in quite that way, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But think of it this way. Every minute you spend in that house is a minute you're protecting your financial interests. Very expensive minutes, if you calculate what the house is worth. He had a point. Our rental wasn't much, but we'd sunk money into it. Security deposit, first and last month's rent, furniture we'd bought together, appliances we'd upgraded when the landlord's ancient refrigerator finally gave up and died. I had a legal right to that space and everything in it, and I wasn't about to let Marissa's betrayal cost me more than it already had. So that's how I found myself pulling into the driveway of our beige house at 11 o'clock on a Friday morning. My Honda Civic making its usual dying robot noises, my stomach doing acrobatics that would have impressed Olympic gymnasts. The house looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago, which was somehow offensive. It should have looked different. It should have had a sign out front that said site of marital disaster, or maybe beware, emotional hazard. But no, it just sat there being aggressively beige and ordinary, like it hadn't been the location of my complete humiliation. I sat in the car for a solid 5 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front door like it was going to suddenly sprout teeth and eat me. Through the living room window, I could see movement. Marissa was home, probably lounging on the couch we'd bought from a going-out-of-business sale, drinking wine at 11 in the morning like some kind of suburban stereotype come to life. Strategic visit, I muttered to myself. Establishing presence. Protecting financial interests. You've got spreadsheets and a lawyer. You can do this. I got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and used my key, because technically I still lived here, even if I'd been sleeping in a motel room that Abraham Lincoln's ceiling stain had blessed with his presence. The door opened with that same creak that the landlord still hadn't fixed, and I stepped into the entryway that smelled like the candle Marissa always burned, the one called Autumn Harvest, that mostly just smelled like someone had set pumpkins on fire. Marissa was exactly where I'd seen her through the window, on the couch, wine glass in hand, wearing sweatpants and one of my old college t-shirts, which felt like adding insult to injury. She looked up when I walked in, and her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, guilt, defiance, and then something that looked like she'd rehearsed in the mirror: wounded innocence. "Ryan," she said, setting down her wine glass with exaggerated care, like she was performing in a play about estranged couples and had studied method acting. "You're back." "Legally mandated appearance," I said, keeping my voice level and detached, the way Mr. Lawson had coached me. "I'm here to collect some belongings and establish that I haven't abandoned the property. Don't worry, I'm not moving back in. Your wine and your judgment are safe." She stood up, and I noticed she'd been crying, or at least wanted me to think she'd been crying. Her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that was either artfully disheveled or genuinely disheveled, and she had that look that women get when they're about to deploy tears as a strategic weapon. "It was a joke," she said, her voice cracking just enough to be noticeable. "What I said to my mom about you and the dog, it was just a stupid joke. You know how Mom and I are when we get together. We say things we don't mean. We were drinking, and she was venting about her own marriage, and I was just being supportive, and it came out wrong." I stared at her, genuinely amazed at the audacity. "A joke," I repeated slowly, like I was learning a new language and needed to make sure I understood the vocabulary. "You told your mother you'd rather kiss our dog than sleep with your husband." She laughed like it was the punchline to a comedy special. "And your defense is that it was a joke." "Yes." She stepped forward, reaching for my hand, which I immediately moved out of reach. "Ryan, please. I didn't mean it. I love you. We can work through this." "Then the dog must have loved it too," I said, moving past her toward the bedroom. "The joke, I mean. I'm sure Biscuit found it hilarious." I walked into our bedroom. Well, technically still our bedroom, though it hadn't felt like hours in months, and grabbed my duffel bag from the closet. I started pulling clothes off hangers, actually taking the time to grab underwear this time, because I'd learned my lesson about dramatic exits and proper packing. Marissa followed me, hovering in the doorway like a ghost who couldn't decide whether to haunt or apologize. "Where are you staying?" she asked, her voice smaller now, less performance and more genuine confusion. "Ryan, you can't just leave. We're married. We have a life together." "Had?" I corrected, grabbing socks from the dresser drawer. "Had a life together. Past tense. Until I discovered that life was a fiction you were maintaining while living a completely different reality." "What are you talking about?" The confusion seemed real, or she was a better actress than I'd given her credit for. I stopped packing and turned to face her directly. And this was the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating since Mr. Lawson had told me I needed to make this visit. "I know about Trent." The effect was immediate and spectacular. Her jaw literally dropped, like someone had cut the strings holding it in place. The color drained from her face so quickly I was briefly concerned she might actually faint, which would have been inconvenient because I didn't want to deal with medical emergencies on top of everything else. Who? Who told you about Trent? She managed to stammer, which was basically a confession wrapped in a question wrapped in panic. Does it matter? I asked, continuing to pack. Your sister, your credit card statements, the photos, the restaurant receipts from places I paid for through our joint account. Take your pick. The evidence is pretty overwhelming, and I have to say, Marissa, you're not as good at covering your tracks as you think you are. The Portland trip was particularly sloppy. She sat down on the bed, our bed, the one we'd bought together 3 years ago during a Memorial Day sale, and put her head in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might actually be processing the reality of getting caught, maybe even feeling genuine remorse. Then she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face and said, "It's not what you think." I actually laughed, out loud, a genuine bark of laughter that surprised both of us. It's not what I think. Marissa, I have photos of you kissing him. I have bank statements showing you've been funding dates with him using money from our joint account. I have text messages. I have a timeline. I have a color-coded spreadsheet. What part of this isn't what I think? It just happened, she said, which is what people always say when they want to pretend they weren't active participants in their own choices. Trent reached out to me a few months ago, and we started talking, and it just happened. For 3 months, I said. It just happened for 3 months. It just happened through multiple restaurant dates, hotel stays, and a weekend trip to Portland. That's not just happening, Marissa. That's a relationship. That's a choice you made repeatedly, while I was working doubles to support us, while I was being a faithful husband, while I was apparently competing with both your ex-boyfriend and our dog for your affection. She flinched at the dog reference, which told me everything I needed to know about her priorities and her shame. That photo was taken out of context. There is no context where making out with a Labrador retriever makes sense. I zipped up my duffel bag with more force than necessary. But you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. You can kiss whoever or whatever you want. I'm done. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but stopped in the doorway and turned back one more time. Just so we're clear, my lawyer has all the evidence. All of it. The affair, the joint account expenses, everything. If you try to take me for everything in this divorce, it's not going to work out the way you think it will. Her face went from sad to angry in record time, like someone had flipped a switch. Your lawyer? You already got a lawyer? We could have talked about this like adults. We tried that, I said calmly. On Wednesday, remember? Right before you compared me to a dog. That was me trying to talk like an adult. This is me protecting myself from someone who clearly stopped caring about this marriage months ago. I walked out, loaded my duffel bag into my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting my hands shake from the adrenaline that had been holding itself together during the confrontation. I'd done it. I'd gone back, established presence, collected my belongings, and survived the encounter without breaking down or saying anything I'd regret. My phone rang about an hour later, right as I was pulling back into the Sunset Vista Motel's parking lot. Unknown number, which I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Probably the same instinct that told me to check my wife's hidden photos. The instinct that knows when the universe has more disaster to deliver. Ryan. Judith's voice came through the speaker like a guillotine wrapped in false politeness. We need to talk about what you're doing to this family. Mrs. Henderson, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm not doing anything to this family. I'm removing myself from it. You're destroying us, she practically shrieked, abandoning any pretense of civility. Marissa is devastated. She made a mistake, and instead of being a man about it and forgiving her, you're running to lawyers and threatening everything we've built. Everything we've built. I repeated, genuinely confused. What exactly did we build? Because from where I'm standing, I built a marriage while your daughter built a side relationship and you encouraged it. How dare you? Ma'am, I interrupted, and I realized I was smiling, actually smiling during this conversation. The family destroyed itself somewhere between the wine glasses and the dog shampoo fund. I'm just the guy who finally noticed and decided to stop paying for it. I hung up before she could respond, blocked the number, and walked into my motel room feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce papers were filed on a Monday morning, which felt poetic in a way that only people going through legal dissolution of their marriage can appreciate. Mondays are already universally hated, so why not add some official documentation of your failed relationship to really lean into the misery? Mr. Lawson had prepared everything with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made me understand why he'd been doing this for 30 years and hadn't burned out or developed a drinking problem that I knew of. The papers were comprehensive, brutal in their honesty, and cited adultery with enough supporting evidence that I'm pretty sure we could have taught a law school class on proper documentation of infidelity. The process server delivered them to Marissa on a Tuesday afternoon, while she was presumably at home doing whatever people who don't have jobs do during the day. I wasn't there to witness it, obviously, because I was at work stacking boxes and living my best recently separated life, but I got a text notification from Mr. Lawson's office that said papers served successfully at 2:47 p.m. with a level of professional satisfaction that made me want to high-five everyone in the warehouse. Marissa's response came approximately 11 minutes later, which told me she'd either speed read through 15 pages of legal documentation or, more likely, had seen the words petition for dissolution of marriage on the first page and immediately gone into panic mode without reading the rest. My phone buzzed with a text that was trying so hard to sound reasonable and mature that it actually achieved the opposite effect. Ryan, this is insane. Can't we talk about this like adults? We don't need lawyers and court dates. We can work this out ourselves. Please. I stared at that message for a good 30 seconds, sitting in my car during my lunch break, eating a sandwich I'd made that morning in the motel room using bread, turkey, and the determination of a man who'd learned that restaurant food was expensive and I had legal fees to pay. The audacity of that text was impressive, really. The sheer nerve it took to ask if we could talk like adults after everything that had happened. I typed back with the kind of concise clarity that comes from having absolutely no patience left for manipulation. We tried that. You chose the dog. I watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again, disappear again, like she was typing and deleting responses in real time, probably cycling through various manipulation tactics and trying to figure out which one would work. Eventually, she gave up, and the dots disappeared for good. I finished my sandwich in peace, which tasted better than any meal I'd eaten in the last 4 years of marriage, and went back to work feeling like I'd won a small but significant victory. The settlement meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later, which gave both sides time to prepare their cases, review finances, and presumably practice their courtroom faces in the mirror. It was held in a conference room at the county courthouse that smelled like old wood, stale coffee, and the accumulated disappointment of thousands of divorces that had happened before ours. The room had a long table, uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed to make you want to settle quickly just so you could leave, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill, which felt appropriate for the occasion. Mr. Lawson arrived first, carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars and possibly a natural disaster, wearing the same suit he'd worn to our first meeting but with a different tie. This one had tiny scales of justice on it, which I appreciated for the commitment to theme. He set up his materials with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, arranging folders, legal pads, and pens in a specific configuration that probably meant something in lawyer language. Remember, he said to me quietly as we waited, don't react emotionally to anything her lawyer says. Don't engage directly with Marissa. Let me do the talking. Your job is to sit there, look reasonable, and let me dismantle whatever nonsense they're going to try to pull. I can do that, I said. I've been practicing my reasonable person face in the motel bathroom mirror. How's that working out? The mirror cracked, but I think that was unrelated. He snorted, which I was learning was his version of a laugh. And then the door opened and Marissa walked in with her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Hendricks who looked like she'd graduated from law school approximately 15 minutes ago and was trying very hard to project an air of competence that her baby face wasn't quite supporting. She wore a power suit that was slightly too big for her, carried a briefcase that looked brand new, and had the eager energy of someone who'd watched too many legal dramas and thought real courtroom proceedings involved dramatic music and surprise witnesses. Marissa, for her part, had clearly dressed for maximum sympathy points. She wore a simple dress that made her look vulnerable, minimal makeup that somehow emphasized that she'd been crying, and had her hair styled in a way that suggested innocent victim rather than person who cheated on her husband for 3 months and documented it like a scrapbooking project. She didn't look at me when she sat down, which was fine because I was looking at a spot on the wall just past her left shoulder and pretending she was furniture. The mediator, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Gerald, who'd probably presided over more failed marriages than a divorce-themed amusement park, called the meeting to order with all the enthusiasm of someone reading assembly instructions for furniture. "We're here to discuss the dissolution of marriage between Ryan Cooper and Marissa Cooper, previously Marissa Henderson," Gerald said, reading from a file. "Both parties have legal representation. Let's start with asset division and work our way through the issues. Ms. Hendricks, you filed a preliminary request for spousal support and assumption of shared debts by Mr. Cooper. Would you like to present your case?" Patricia Hendricks stood up, which seemed unnecessary since we were in a conference room and not a courtroom, but I guess she needed the theatrical moment. She opened her folder with a flourish that would have been more impressive if some papers hadn't immediately fallen out, which she quickly gathered while pretending it hadn't happened. "Your Honor, Mr. Gerald," she started, already fumbling, and I saw Mr. Lawson's lips twitch with suppressed amusement. "My client has been financially dependent on Mr. Cooper throughout their marriage. She gave up career opportunities to support the household, and now finds herself in a precarious financial position through no fault of her own." "No fault of her own," I muttered under my breath, and Mr. Lawson's hand moved subtly in a gesture that meant, "Shut up and let me work." "Furthermore," Patricia continued, gaining confidence, "there are significant credit card debts that were incurred during the marriage for household expenses and necessary purchases. We believe it's only fair that Mr. Cooper assume responsibility for 50% of these debts, as they were accumulated during the marriage for mutual benefit." She slid a document across the table toward Mr. Lawson, who picked it up, glanced at it, and then did something I'll never forget. He pressed his lips together so hard they disappeared. His shoulders started shaking slightly, and I realized he was trying not to laugh. Actually laugh. In the middle of a settlement conference. He coughed, took a sip of water from the bottle he'd brought, and then set the paper down with the kind of careful control that suggested he was exercising every ounce of professional restraint he possessed. "I'm sorry," Mr. Lawson said, his voice strained with suppressed laughter. "I just need to clarify something. You're asking my client to assume 50% of debts that include—" He pulled out his reading glasses and made a show of examining the document. $847 at a store called Dog Couture, $308 at Pooch Paradise Premium Grooming, and $216 at something called Bark and Bath Boutique? Patricia's confidence wavered. "Those were household expenses. My client doesn't wear dog clothes," Mr. Lawson interrupted, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. "Unless I'm mistaken about his species, which I'm fairly confident I'm not. My client is not paying for canine accessories, luxury pet grooming, or whatever services are offered at establishments with bark in the name. The dog is part of the household." Patricia tried again. "The dog," Mr. Lawson said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining basic math to a particularly slow student, "is not my client's responsibility anymore, seeing as he's divorcing his wife who, according to her own words that my client overheard, would rather kiss the dog than her husband. She can keep the dog. She can keep all the dog's couture. She can keep the grooming bills. What she cannot keep is any expectation that my client will fund her pet's lifestyle." Marissa's face had gone bright red, and she was staring at the table like she was trying to will herself into another dimension. Patricia looked at her client, then at the document, then back at Mr. Lawson, clearly realizing that her strategy of ask for everything and see what sticks was not going as planned. "There are also restaurant expenses," Patricia started, but Mr. Lawson was already pulling out his own folder, this one significantly thicker and much more organized. "Yes, let's talk about restaurant expenses," he said with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Christmas morning. "Specifically, let's talk about the $147 at Giovanni's Italian restaurant on June 15th, when my client was working a double shift at Morrison's warehouse. Or the $212 dinner at the River House on July 23rd, when my client was, again, at work. These restaurant expenses that were charged to the joint account while my client was earning the money that funded them were not household expenses. They were dates. Dates with, he consulted his notes with exaggerated care. Mr. Trent Morrison, Mrs. Cooper's ex-boyfriend, with whom she conducted an affair for approximately 3 months. The room went completely silent except for the humming of the fluorescent lights and what I'm pretty sure was Patricia Hendricks's professional dreams dying in real time. Gerald, the mediator, looked up from his notes with the first sign of actual interest he'd shown since the meeting started. Is there documentation of this affair? Extensive documentation, Mr. Lawson said, sliding a folder across the table that I knew contained copies of photos, text messages, and bank statements. Photos, text messages, credit card statements showing charges at hotels, restaurants, and other establishments. My client has been meticulous in his record keeping. By the time we finished going through every line item, every receipt, every piece of evidence that Marissa had spent marital funds on her affair, Patricia Hendricks looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and never practice law again. The requests for spousal support were withdrawn. The demands that I cover her credit card debt disappeared faster than common sense at a reality TV casting call. When it was all said and done, after 2 hours of negotiation that was really just Mr. Lawson systematically destroying every argument Patricia tried to make, I walked out of that courthouse with everything that mattered. My truck with its dying robot engine, my savings account that I'd been carefully protecting, and my sanity, which was somehow intact despite everything. Marissa kept the dog, the debt, and what I imagine was a very awkward conversation with her lawyer about why lying to your attorney is generally a bad strategy. Fair trade, I thought, getting into my Honda Civic and driving back to my motel room. Fair trade. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in September, which felt appropriately anticlimactic for something that had consumed 3 months of my life and approximately 30% of my mental capacity. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no judge banging a gavel while declaring us officially strangers, no orchestra swelling with emotional music in the background. It was just Gerald the mediator signing some papers, Mr. Lawson shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested he was proud of me in the way a coach is proud of an athlete who finally learned to stop tripping over their own feet, and me walking out of the courthouse into September sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. I was officially single, officially free, officially no longer married to a woman who'd compared me to a Labrador retriever and then proceeded to prove that her judgment was even worse than that initial comparison suggested. The irony was that I actually felt grateful to Biscuit now. That dog had inadvertently shown me who I was married to, and in a weird way, I owed him a debt of gratitude and possibly some premium dog treats, though I wasn't going to be the one buying them anymore. The first order of business, according to Mr. Lawson's final advice given over handshakes and what I suspected was genuine fondness despite his professional detachment, was to get out of the Sunset Vista Motel before I either became a permanent fixture or the wall cat decided to make our relationship official. I'd been living there for 3 months, and while Abraham Lincoln's ceiling stain and I had developed a comfortable rapport, it was time to find actual housing that didn't charge by the night and didn't have alleged feline infrastructure. I'd been apartment hunting in my spare time between work shifts and legal proceedings, which turned out to be easier than expected because my requirements were refreshingly simple. 4 walls, a roof that didn't leak, a bathroom where all the fixtures worked simultaneously, and a location that wasn't more than 20 minutes from Morrison's warehouse. I wasn't asking for luxury. I was asking for basic functionality and the absence of judgment, which is apparently a low enough bar that I found a place within a week. The apartment was a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a building that had been constructed sometime in the 80s and had embraced that decade's aesthetic choices with concerning enthusiasm. The carpet was beige, because apparently I couldn't escape beige no matter how hard I tried. And the kitchen had linoleum flooring in a pattern that looked like someone had spilled a box of crayons and decided to make it permanent. But the rent was $650 a month, utilities included, and the landlord was a 70-year-old woman named Margaret who'd asked exactly 2 questions during my application. Do you pay on time? And are you going to throw parties that wake me up? When I'd answered yes to the first and no to the second, she'd handed me the keys and told me I was her favorite tenant already. The apartment was empty when I got the keys, which made sense because I owned approximately nothing after the divorce settlement. Marissa had kept all the furniture we'd bought together, partly because she'd insisted on it during negotiations, and partly because I genuinely didn't want any of it. Every couch cushion, every coffee table, every lamp had memories attached to it like barnacles on a ship, and I wanted to start fresh without the ghost of my failed marriage sitting on the second-hand love seat we'd bought from Craigslist. So I did what any newly divorced man with a promotion, a modest savings account, and a desperate need for furniture does. I went to IKEA on a Saturday morning and bought the bare essentials. A bed frame, a mattress that came rolled up like a burrito and expanded when you opened it, which felt like a metaphor for my life. A small couch that the display model promised was perfect for urban living, which is IKEA code for you'll fit on it if you're not too tall or too optimistic. A kitchen table with 2 chairs because I was done pretending I needed seating for guests I never had. Some plates, silverware, a couple of pots and pans, and a coffee maker that looked like it could actually produce coffee instead of the brown regret liquid the motel had specialized in. The total came to $947, which was less than Marissa had spent on dog accessories in 3 months. And that thought made me smile, while the cashier rang up my Swedish meatballs and furniture that required assembly and an engineering degree. I'd mentioned my move to Rick during a shift at the warehouse, not making a big deal out of it, just casual conversation while we were reorganizing the shipping area. Rick had immediately volunteered himself and Jamie, another warehouse worker who I'd become friendly with over the past few months, to help me move, which was generous considering I owned so little that moving basically meant transporting IKEA boxes and the contents of one duffel bag. They showed up at my new apartment on Sunday morning in Rick's pickup truck, which was significantly more reliable than my Honda Civic and also had a working radio that didn't occasionally emit sounds like a robot having an existential crisis. Jamie brought coffee in actual to-go cups from an actual coffee shop, which immediately made her my favorite person in the greater metropolitan area. Jamie was in her late 20s, had been working at Morrison's for about 2 years, and had the kind of no-nonsense personality that came from being the oldest of 6 siblings and learning early that life doesn't care about your feelings, so you might as well laugh at it. She had bright red hair that she claimed was natural, but I suspected came from a bottle, a collection of tattoos that told stories she'd share if you bought her enough beer, and opinions about everything that she expressed with the confidence of someone who'd stopped caring what people thought around her 15th birthday. "So this is the Fresh Start Palace," Jamie said, walking into my empty apartment and immediately testing the acoustics by yelling freedom at the top of her lungs. The echo was impressive. Nice. Very minimalist. Very. I'm starting over, and I've made peace with it. I approve. The landlord downstairs might not approve of the yelling, I said, but I was smiling because something about Jamie's energy was contagious. "Margaret?" Jamie asked. I passed her on the way up. She gave me a thumbs up. I think she likes me. Rick came in carrying a box marked Malm that presumably contained bed frame parts and tiny Allen wrenches that would definitely get lost before assembly was complete. "Where do you want this?" "Bedroom," I suggested, because that seemed logical, though with IKEA furniture, logic was more of a guideline than a rule. We spent the next 3 hours assembling furniture, which turned into an adventure in Swedish engineering, questionable instructions, and the discovery that I had somehow ended up with 3 extra screws after building the bed frame, which either meant I was a genius who'd found efficiencies in the design or the bed was going to collapse at 3 in the morning and kill me. Rick insisted it was the former. Jamie bet $20 it was the latter and wanted to be notified immediately if I died. By 2 in the afternoon, my apartment looked almost like a place where humans lived. The bed was assembled and had sheets on it. The couch was arranged in front of where a TV would go once I could afford one. The kitchen table was set up near the window that overlooked the parking lot, which wasn't much of a view, but was better than the parking lot view I'd had at the motel, because this one didn't have a gas station advertising questionable hot dogs. "Okay," Rick said, stepping back and surveying our work like a contractor admiring a completed project. "This is officially a home. Bare bones, but functional. Now we celebrate." "Celebrate how?" I asked, because I didn't have any food in the apartment yet and wasn't sure what celebrating looked like in this context. Jamie pulled out her phone with a grin. "We're getting fried chicken. Not the fancy kind. Not the organic free-range whatever kind. The greasy, delicious, probably terrible for you kind that comes in a bucket with biscuits and coleslaw. The kind of chicken that says, I've survived something difficult, and now I'm going to eat my feelings in the best possible way." 20 minutes later, we were sitting around my new kitchen table with a bucket of fried chicken from a place called Colonel's Best that was definitely not affiliated with any major chains, but made up for its legal ambiguity with genuinely excellent food. We also had beer. Rick had brought a six-pack of some local IPA that he swore was life-changing. Though all beer tastes pretty similar when you're drinking it to celebrate freedom from a marriage that involved competing with a dog for affection. Here's to new beginnings, Jamie said, raising her beer bottle in a toast. And to leaving behind relationships that don't serve us, whether those relationships are with terrible spouses, judgmental in-laws, or apartments with alleged wall cats. To new beginnings, Rick echoed, clinking his bottle against Jamie's and then mine. And to dogs everywhere, I added, because apparently I couldn't let it go completely. May they only date within their species, and may their owners have better judgment than my ex-wife. We laughed, and it was real laughter, the kind that comes from your chest and feels genuine and warm. We ate fried chicken that was so greasy it probably violated several health codes, but tasted like victory and new starts. We drank beer that may or may not have been life-changing, but was certainly cold and refreshing. We sat in my nearly empty apartment with its beige carpet and questionable linoleum, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt at home. Not because the apartment was fancy or even particularly nice. Not because I had a lot of stuff or impressive furniture, but because I was surrounded by people who'd shown up for me without expecting anything in return, eating chicken that nobody was judging me for enjoying, in a space that was entirely mine and free from the weight of a relationship that had been dead long before I'd been brave enough to bury it. You doing okay? Rick asked after his third beer, looking at me with the kind of genuine concern that middle-aged fathers and decent supervisors specialize in. Like, actually okay? Because 3 months ago you were living in a motel after discovering your wife's greatest hits of betrayal, and now you're here starting over. That's a lot. I thought about it for a moment, genuinely considering the question instead of giving some automatic response. Was I okay? I was divorced. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment with barely any furniture and a bed that might be held together with hopes and dreams. I was eating fried chicken for dinner on a Sunday evening with my supervisor and a coworker instead of having some sophisticated adult meal with a spouse who respected me. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. Yeah, I'm actually okay. Better than okay. I'm free. Jamie smiled and grabbed another piece of chicken. Freedom tastes like fried chicken and cheap beer, apparently. Best meal I've had in years, I said. And honestly, it was. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few months. Work, apartment, sleep, repeat. Except now the routine felt like living instead of surviving. I got a promotion to shift supervisor, which came with a modest raise and the authority to tell people where to stack boxes, which was more satisfying than it should have been. That's when I ran into Clara Mitchell from HR, the accountant who'd always processed my overtime paychecks with a smile and occasionally made jokes about the warehouse's creative interpretation of safety regulations. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop near work on a Saturday morning. She was reading a book about financial planning, which should have been boring but somehow seemed charming when she explained she was trying to buy a house. Coffee? I asked, surprising myself with the boldness. Why not? She said. And that smile made me remember what it felt like to be interested in someone who might actually be interested back. We talked for 2 hours. She laughed at my terrible jokes, didn't compare me to any household pets, and when I mentioned I was divorced, she just nodded like it was information, not a character flaw. Progress, I thought. Definite progress. 6 months later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short, bitter, unmistakably Marissa borrowing someone's phone. Probably her mother's, since I'd blocked both of them months ago. I hope she's worth it. I looked at Clara sleeping on my couch, her head on my shoulder, some documentary about architecture playing on the TV I'd finally bought. We'd been dating for 3 months. She made me laugh. She paid for her own dinners. She'd never once mentioned my resemblance to any animals, domesticated or otherwise. I typed back, she is. She doesn't bark when I speak. Then I blocked the number and set my phone down. Clara stirred, looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I said, and meant it. That night, I thought about that first moment, my wife comparing me to a dog, the conversation that ended a marriage. The funny thing about dogs is they're loyal. Marissa never was. You can't compete with someone's ego when they're trying to train you like a pet. You just take off the leash, open the door, and walk yourself to freedom. Best decision I ever made.